Hey, what's up, everyone? This is Antonio Fletcher back with you once again. This is going to be a hangout on my top 5 most terrible atheist arguments. Now, over the years I've been debating with atheists, I've come across many arguments that I just find just bad. I mean, really, really bad. And I've compiled a collection of what I think is, in my personal opinion, the top 5 most terrible atheist arguments. So this should be a very interesting hangout. First, let me take care of a few things, and then afterwards I'll get into the top 5. Just give me just a moment. All right, I'm back. Now, with that said, previously, let's get into the top 5. Number 5, and that is, there hasn't been any evidence or sufficient evidence presented for God. Way too many off, excuse me, way too often when man, I'm starting off pretty bad. All right, way too often when this claim is made, the atheist has either ignored defining what would constitute as evidence or sufficient evidence for God they would accept, or they fail to address evidence actually presented and merely dismissing it as no evidence or insufficient evidence, or if they do attempt to define what they would consider evidence or sufficient evidence, they have fallacious criterion in which they would consider evidence or sufficient evidence. Note examples of all the above I mentioned. And the first one I mentioned was ignores defining what would constitute as evidence or sufficient evidence. Questions with atheists in which I would ask them, so you want evidence of God, right? What would constitute as evidence or sufficient evidence for you? They would respond, it's not my job to define that for you, but only your job to present it. This goes into point B, which is fails to address evidence actually presented and merely dismissing it as no evidence or insufficient evidence. These atheists just want to attack, but don't want to define what would be considered evidence or sufficient evidence. They know that given a basis for what they would accept would mean they would inevitably have the burden of proof of explaining their basis for rejection. I've had conversations where these atheists would say ad nauseum, that's not evidence, that's not evidence, that's not evidence, and so on, but would never explain why. These atheists are quite easy to expose and are not worth wasting time with. And the last bit here is they have fallacious criteria in which they would consider evidence or sufficient evidence. For the atheists whom actually gives their criteria in which they would consider evidence or sufficient evidence, their criteria is flat out fallacious. An example of such would be, if God exists, is omniscient, and wants me to know he exists, I would expect he would know what kind of evidence I would accept and reveal himself accordingly. Then you'll show them people who have gone to believe in God based on evidence they've seen, and they'll say something like, their standards for why they became believers are quite low and probably most likely believed for emotional, not intellectual reasons. Or they'll respond with something like, that's great, they felt God revealed himself to them, but why is God cherry picking certain people in which he reveals himself to? If he exists, he sure hasn't revealed himself to me. Why would he hide himself from me when I want him to reveal himself to me if he indeed truly exists? The fact that he hasn't is good evidence he does not exist. Then you, as the believer, might say to them, well, scripture says that God hides himself from the proud, but reveals himself to the humble. So according to scripture, God hasn't revealed himself to you because you haven't humbled yourself. Then they might respond saying something like, well, that's just a convenient ad hoc get out of jail free excuse. They don't want to find God according to what scripture says, but they want to have their own criteria in which they claim will be acceptable to them, but in fact is actually fallacious. Many people have testimonies in which they have said God revealed himself to them when they finally put themselves and their pride aside and asked God to come into their lives. God came to them in exactly the way scripture says, but for the prideful atheists, that isn't good enough. When talking to atheists like this long enough, you'll find it's not a matter of sufficient evidence, but a matter of pride, which affects how they evaluate evidence and results in fallacious criteria in which they have put from the outset. Reason number 4, the burden of proof lies upon the one making the positive claim, the deist, not the other way around. This is just nonsense. The burden of proof is a two-way street, not just on the deist. It is presumed the deist is the only one making a positive claim, but simply rejecting the claims of one side isn't evidence to the contrary. It's not merely a matter of the atheist rejecting the claims the deist makes, but also they have to provide a positive case for their position as well. Even a successful rejection of theistic points presented doesn't provide a positive case that God doesn't exist. And this is conversely true that the rejection of atheistic points doesn't provide a positive case that God does exist. Many atheists try to get around this by claiming their position is merely a lack of belief, so they don't have a positive position in which would entail the burden of proof. However, it is impossible to reject deistic claims without having a positive basis for why such claims are insufficient. This isn't merely a lack of belief. You have to have a positive reason for why you reject presented evidence. Merely lacking belief makes it impossible to argue against any case presented, no matter how strong or weak such the case may in reality be. The basis for rejection must necessarily be rooted in a positive foundation, which is the belief that God does not exist, which also requires the burden of proof. Reason number 3, using the Bible as evidence for God is circular reasoning. This is false because such a claim is based on ignorance of what the Bible says. First of all, the term Bible means library. What is the significance behind this? Well, the Bible is a collection of 66 books compiled into one huge book. And also, Uh, Lost my train of thought. So yeah, the Bible is a collection of 66 books compiled into one huge book. It is literally a library. Second, the writings in the Bible, which make up the 66 books, are a collection of historical documents. And using different historical documents to corroborate each other cannot, by definition, be circular reasoning by any stretch of the imagination. Also, using historical documents which speak about God can rationally be used to support he exists. These documents have real, historically verified persons, such as Abraham, Moses, Noah, and even Jesus himself. And Abraham, Moses, and Noah were just a few of the many prophets of God in the Bible. And of course, the supreme confirmation of the existence of God in Jesus Christ himself, who claimed to be not only the begotten Son of the Father himself. So using the Bible as evidence for God is absolutely not circular reasoning. I gotta take care of something real quick. I'll be back in just a sec. Okay, I'm back. Reason number two, believing in God is just blind faith, no reason, and a denial of reality. First of all, this is absolutely not the biblical concept of faith or what faith is. Biblically speaking, faith is what we have good reason to trust in. We don't have blind faith in God, but we have a good reason to trust God, not simply because he says so, but because of what he's already revealed and proven to us. We see his influence in the lives of his prophets, who were all sinners and had their struggles in their following of the Lord, just like we do. We have overwhelming evidence from many people other than ourselves for what God has done in their lives. So, yes, we have a number of different evidences for this. Also, um, we have the supreme confirmation in the person of Jesus Christ, who is God himself. Jesus loved us first and reached out to us first and even gave his life in such a way nobody else could for our redemption. There are even non-believers out there whom experience what it means to have faith in someone they have good reason to trust in. For instance, if there is someone in their lives in which has been through thick and thin with them and was always there when they needed them, so they have come to a bond with that person and trust with that person. Not blind faith, but a good reason to trust them. Infinitely more so, this is true with Jesus Christ. For what he has already done for us and continues to do, we have good reason to trust in him. It isn't blind faith by any stretch of the imagination. And second of all, while it is true a theist can exhibit blind faith, this is equally as true for the atheist. It cuts both ways. The atheist can simply hold to their lack of belief blindly in spite of reason and deny reality. Without giving sound arguments for their rejection of theistic claims, all they are doing is engaging in blind faith. Hey True, what's up, brother? How you doing? Are you able to hear me? Because if you can hear me right now, I can't hear you.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Cool.
Yeah, I was setting up my mic.
Oh,
So what's going
okay,
on, man?
sounds good. Yeah, I'm just outlining the top five terrible atheist arguments. I can actually
Yeah.
start over real quick if you want to hear them all.
Oh, yeah. You don't have to start over because I know you
Well,
probably.
no, it's all good. It's not a big deal. I mean, um, I actually didn't want to end it too quickly anyway. I'll just go over them again real quick. It won't take me long to get to them. For the benefit of those who are just joining, I'm outlining the top five most terrible atheist arguments. Um, I'm gonna start back over again with five, but I will get through all of them. But uh, yeah, just because I feel like it, especially for the benefit of my brother True here, I'm gonna go over them again. And for the benefit of those who are just joining, I'll go over them again. And I'm gonna start back with the top one. And here's number five. There hasn't been any evidence or sufficient evidence presented for God. Way too often, when this claim is made, the atheist has either ignored defining what would constitute as evidence or sufficient evidence for God they would accept, fails to address evidence actually presented and merely dismissing it as no evidence or insufficient evidence, or if they do attempt to define what they would consider evidence or sufficient evidence, they have fallacious criterion in which they would consider evidence or sufficient evidence. Note the examples of what I just mentioned, which is the first one here is ignores defining what would constitute as evidence or sufficient evidence. I've been in discussions with atheists in which I would ask them, so you want evidence of God, right? What would constitute as evidence or sufficient evidence for you? They would respond, it's not my job to define that for you, but only your job to present it, which goes into point B. Fails to address evidence actually presented and merely dismissing it as no evidence or insufficient evidence. These atheists just want to attack, but don't want to define what would be considered evidence or sufficient evidence. They know that given the basis for what they would accept would mean that they would inevitably have the burden of proof of explaining the basis for their rejection. I've had conversations where these atheists would say ad nauseum, but that's not evidence, that's not evidence, that's not evidence, and so on, but would never explain why. These atheists are quite easy to expose and are not worth wasting time with. By the way, True, if you want to like stop me, have commentary on some of what I'm saying, feel free. Um, and here's the third reason I laid for reason number five. They have fallacious criteria in which they would consider evidence or sufficient evidence. For the atheist whom actually gives their criteria in which they would consider evidence or sufficient evidence, their criteria is flat out fallacious. An example of such would be if God exists, is omniscient, and wants me to know he exists, I would expect he would know what kind of evidence I would accept and reveal himself accordingly. Then you'll show them people who have gone to believe in God based on evidence they've seen, and they'll say something like, their standards for why they became believers are quite low and probably most likely believed for emotional, not intellectual reasons. Or they'll say something like, well, that's great. They felt God revealed himself to them. But why is God cherry picking, revealing himself to certain people? If he exists, he sure hasn't revealed himself to me. Why would he hide himself from me when I want him to reveal himself to me if he indeed truly exists? The fact that he hasn't is good evidence he does not exist. Then you as a believer might say to them, Well, scripture says that God hides himself from the proud, but reveals himself to the humble. So according to scripture, God hasn't revealed himself to you because you haven't humbled yourself. Then they might respond by saying something like, well, that's just a convenient ad hoc get out of jail free excuse. What it is that they don't want to find God according to what scripture says, but want to have their own criteria in which they claim would be acceptable to them, but in fact is actually fallacious. Many people have testimonies in which they have said God revealed himself to them when they finally put themselves and their pride aside and asked God to come into their lives. God came to them in exactly the way scripture says, but for the prideful atheists, that isn't good enough. When talking to atheists like this long enough, you'll find it's not a matter of sufficient evidence, but a matter of pride, which affects how they evaluate evidence and results in fallacious criteria in which they have put on to said evidence from the outset. Reason number 4, the burden of proof lies upon the one making the positive claim, aka the theist, not the other way around. This is just nonsense. The burden of proof is a two-way street, not just on the theist. It's presumed the theist is the only one making a positive claim, but simply rejecting the claims of one side isn't evidence to the contrary. It's not merely a matter of the atheist rejecting the claims the theist makes, but also they have to provide a positive case for their position as well. Even a successful rejection of theistic points presented doesn't provide a positive case that God doesn't exist. And this is conversely true that the rejection of atheistic points doesn't provide a positive case that God does exist. Many atheists try to get around this by claiming their position is merely a lack of belief, so they don't have a positive position in which would entail the burden of proof. However, it is impossible to reject theistic claims without having a positive basis for why such claims are insufficient. This isn't merely a lack of belief. You have to have a positive reason for why you reject presented evidence. Merely lacking belief makes it impossible to argue against any case presented, no matter how weak or strong the case in reality may be. The basis for rejection must necessarily be rooted in a positive foundation, which is the belief God does not exist, which also requires the burden of proof. Reason number 3, using the Bible as evidence for God is circular reasoning. This is false because such a claim is based on ignorance of what the Bible is. First of all, the term Bible means library. What is the significance behind this? Well, the Bible is a collection of 66 books compiled into one huge book. It is literally a library. Second, the writings in the Bible, which make up the 66 books, are a collection of historical documents. Using different historical documents to corroborate each other cannot, by definition, be circular reasoning by any stretch of the imagination. Also, using historical documents which speak about God can rationally be used as support he exists. These documents have real, historically verified persons, such as Abraham, Moses, Noah, and even Jesus himself. And Abraham, Moses, and Noah were just a few of the many prophets of God in the Bible. And of course, the supreme confirmation of the existence of God in Jesus Christ himself, who claimed to be not only the begotten Son of the Father, but also God himself. So, using the Bible as evidence for God is absolutely not circular reasoning. Reason number 2, believing in God is just blind faith, no reason, and a denial of reality. First of all, this is absolutely not the biblical concept of what faith is. Biblically speaking, faith is what we have good reason to trust in. We don't have blind faith in God, but we have a good reason to trust God, not simply because he says so, but because of what he's already revealed and proven to us. We see his influence in the lives of his prophets, whom were all sinners and had their struggles in their following of the Lord, just like we do. We have overwhelming evidence from many people other than ourselves for what God has done in their lives, and we have the supreme confirmation in the person of Jesus Christ, who is God himself. Jesus loved us first and reached out to us first and even gave his life in such a way for us nobody else could for our redemption. There are even non-believers out there whom experience what it means to have faith in someone they have good reason to trust in. For instance, if there is someone in their lives in which has been through thick and thin with them and was always there when they needed them, so they have come to have a bond with that person and a trust with that person, not blind faith, but a good reason to trust them. Infinitely more so, this is true with Jesus Christ. For what he has already done for us and continues to do, we have good reason to trust in him. It isn't blind faith by any stretch of the imagination. And second of all, while it is true that these can exhibit blind faith, this is equally as true for the atheist. It cuts both ways. The atheist can simply hold to their lack of belief in spite of reason and deny reality. Without giving sound arguments for their rejection of theistic claims, all they are doing is engaging in blind faith. Before I get to number one, I want to mention a few dishonorable mentions which didn't make the top 5 cut, because there's nothing honorable about a bad argument. That's why I didn't call them, you can't really call them honorable mentions. They're more dishonorable mentions, but I'm gonna call them honorable mentions anyway. Honorable mention number 1. Who designed the designer? This is bad for 2 main reasons. Reason number 1 being that if God is considered to be the greatest conceivable being, he logically could not have had a designer. That's simply a logical necessity when talking about what would be the greatest conceivable being, as there could be no greater conceivable being greater than the greatest. Second, you don't need an explanation for the explanation. You don't need an explanation for an explanation to be true. For example, we don't need an explanation for God for it to be true that God created the universe. If we required an explanation for every explanation, such reasoning would destroy science, as science doesn't keep from progressing forward just because there may not currently be an explanation for a particular phenomena. Honorable mention number 2, or dishonorable mention number 2, alleged Bible contradictions. There have been no proven contradictions found anywhere today. What has been found is at times mistaken translations, as the Bible has been translated into different languages and versions many thousands of times, if not much more over many years, and textual errors, but not any outright contradictions in the Word of God. And what also has been found is tons of outright misreading of passages, lack of exegesis, lack of cross-referencing, lack of studying the background culture of the writings, etc. And the number 1 most terrible atheist argument is extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. I've heard this so much over the years, and it's like a broken record. First of all, they need to define what would be extraordinary evidence. This seems to be quite subjective to me, as they seem to think simply attempting to give arguments to show why God exists is by nature an extraordinary thing to do. So it seems almost, if not all, claims made about God are going to be looked at as extraordinary, whatever they define that as. Second, I think it's absolutely false extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. This is just a ridiculous cliche, not a rational argument. Extraordinary claims just require evidence. It doesn't have to be considered extraordinary at all. It could be considered an extraordinary claim if someone came up to you and said they survived a 47-story fall, and there was actually a man who did survive such a fall. You ask that person for the evidence to back that up, and that person shows you the news story which reported it. It clearly proves it was them and that the event happened. There was no actual recorded footage of the actual fall, just the report. The report certainly isn't extraordinary evidence, yet it is evidence of what happened nonetheless. So even if a claim is categorized as extraordinary, it certainly doesn't follow extraordinary evidence is a necessity to back up said claim. And there you have it, the top 5 most terrible atheist arguments. What do you think of that?
Well, I think there's a lot more than just the arguments that you were presenting just now. For example, I just received a message from somebody over the last video that I just uploaded. And here's how his response followed to try to refute my argument. He said, he's quoting me now. He says, turbines and motors universally have been observed only coming from intelligent agents. This is not a matter of opinion or faith, but 100% fact. That's what I said in the video. I said, we infer that the motors, languages, and turbines of the cell are also produced by intelligent agents. He said this, while I infer this, you just disproved premise 1 by providing natural examples of turbines, motors, and languages. So if you want to continue with the idea of ID, you'll have to provide evidence that the process is directed by an intelligence and a mechanism whereby this is done. Because so far, all you've done is assert it with no explanation or mechanism. Now, obviously, we all know what I say about the mechanism. It's the mechanism would be the intelligence, because the intelligence is that directive force behind the physical causing these particular components to come together so you can have overall function. You can have the motors, turbines, and codes. Without a thinking agent, you're not going to be able to build those particular types of components. But notice what he said there. He said, I will infer this, that you just disproved premise 1 by providing natural examples of turbines, motors, and languages. Well, why did it disprove premise 1? Because they're natural examples. You see, in there, there's a hidden assumption by the naturalist, the evolutionist, that natural phenomena were not the product of intelligent agents. He's assuming that you cannot compare it because of his presuppositions of what he thinks abiogenesis can do, or the laws of physics and chemistry can do without an intelligent agent, that therefore natural processes can produce these particular types of components, that there is actually evidence for nature to build these particular types of things. He's ignoring the fact that because they are motors and turbines found inside of nature, that this is where this connection comes from to be attached to the argument of intelligent design, because motors, turbines, and codes are only known to come from intelligent agents. So this is where the connection is. Based on our uniform experience of where those particular components come from, that's the reason why we can connect it to nature and look at certain things in nature when we find those particular types of functions. What he's basically doing is just dropping a gate between both of these premises, both of these particular talking points here. And yes, we have turbines inside of the cell, and yes, we have turbines built by intelligent agents, but no, we're not going to accept that natural turbines were the product of an intelligent agent because they're natural. I mean, there's just an assertion here while he tries to drop a gate between this logical conclusions where this evidence is logically leading us to, but nothing really there to back it up. And that's typically the way that they always approach the great debate. That's typically how they're always bringing their arguments. They're always talking about things according to their presuppositions or their subjective perception of things. I'll give you another example of what I mean by this so that I can hopefully help people better understand what I mean. Has any Christian out here ever heard, well, God is basically equivalent to the flying spaghetti monster or the pink unicorn? Fairies and all that other crap, right? We've all heard atheists make those types of statements before. But what does that mean? Nothing. All that means is that an atheist doubts it. And of course, and according to his subjective doubts, he's equating God to flying spaghetti monsters, unicorns, and so on. There's no objectivity there. It's equivalent to a Christian saying in the reverse that we believe in God, the Bible, Jesus. We believe in the supernatural. Okay, well, we understand that we believe that, but that doesn't necessarily prove our position or our beliefs. And likewise with an atheist, of course, because he doubts Christianity and he doubts theism and God beliefs, he's going to equate God beliefs to unicorns and all these other fairy tales, because in his mind, he thinks it's equivalent because he doubts the supernatural. He doubts those particular types of things. So he's going to equate it to the ridiculous and the trivial fairy tales because he's an atheist. But there's no objectivity there. There's no empirical, rational, logical justification in an objective way that those assertions that he's making are actually objectively true, right? So this is the problem that I've always seen atheists make, that they make assertions, but it stays assertions. There is never any objective power or way to actually refute anything that the Christians say or anything that the ID proponent says. Mm-hmm. It's usually only just the matter of their opinion, but there's never any logical connection to anything that they're saying.
I think you laid it out quite eloquently there. Assertions that say assertions. That should be some sort of slogan that theists should use for atheists, or make it into like a kind of a cool jingle. Maybe something the Clown Car Posse use. Assertions that say assertions. Yeah,
it's true though. I mean, it is true though. I mean, I think everybody really needs to think about that. I mean, how often do you hear those remarks being made by them? And whenever they're talking about something else like evolution, what is it that they're always doing? It always comes down to pareidolia, or perception, like seeing patterns on the door or clouds in the sky. They use their imagination because they can picture or perceive things to line up according to their personal views. Therefore, this is some sort of empirical, scientific, rational case. But it's not any of that, really. It never leaves the confines of their opinions. I mean, you look at the fossil record, for example, you can see two organisms that look very closely related to each other, because one of them, the bone structures may look closer to, some other bone structure. But what does that mean? I mean, I can sit over here and line up a skateboard with a bike, and take that bike and line it up with a motorcycle and a crotch rocket and all sorts of different vehicles and their complexity. But that doesn't therefore mean that they all originated from some sort of common, piece of metal millions and millions and millions of years ago. And if some alien race came to this planet and didn't know anything about our technology, didn't know anything about any of our own creation, and they, tried to make that particular assertion, they wouldn't be justified either. It would be on the same level. Oh, look, they all share similar complexities. Maybe the Earthlings didn't make these machines. Maybe they were actually built by some sort of piece of iron and metal, and through wind and erosion and certain earthquakes and natural phenomena, that they slowly diverged and moved into one complexity to the other. These are just assertions, and it's always coming down to pareidolia, just pattern seeking. But there's never any objectivity with any of the assertions they make.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, man. And yeah, like you said earlier, man, there are so many more terrible arguments that atheists give. Yeah, there was just so many that didn't make it into even the dishonorable mentions I laid out. But yeah, as you rightly point out, just the extent of what they do is assertions. Like when they say something like extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, that's just an assertion. That isn't based in reality at all.
Right, and unfortunately, when Christians hear statements like that, like they pull out of their butt cheeks. They don't know how to respond to it, because it's like, okay, where did that come from? I mean, how do you respond to something that somebody just makes up like that? You just have to call it out. Well, according to who, right?
Right.
Who makes that statement? Where is this grid of what requires extraordinary evidence and what doesn't? They don't have it. It's just this assertion that according to them, it's an extraordinary claim. And I think that's something that Christians need to get themselves out of. We've been letting them lead us into this game to where, okay, they're the atheists, they doubt. So therefore, they're on some sort of pedestal to determine what evidence is valid or is invalid under their subjective terms, right? Exactly. If you allow somebody If you allow somebody who doesn't believe and who has multiple different beliefs that are keeping them from objectively considering what you have to say to them, those alternative beliefs are going to always, interpret what is going to be valid or invalid. So no matter what you say to these people, you might as well be flushing what you say to them down the toilet. You don't approach them to where, okay, well, you're an atheist, you doubt, and the burden of proof is on me, so therefore I have to prove to you that God exists. I have to prove to you my evidence. No. What you do is you provide your evidence, you provide your information, not intending to prove to the person that you're speaking to, but for everybody and anybody who's going to be listening or reading your comments, for them to see, okay, this atheist is claiming that he just disbelieves. Notice how all of my arguments are logically following to their conclusions. Notice all of the evidence that I'm giving and his behavior and tone towards the argument that I'm giving. It is more so that he is refusing to hear the evidence. He's refusing to acknowledge what I'm saying and doing everything in his power to get around the evidence because he's in denial of the evidence. It's just like what the scripture says. The fool has said in his heart that there is no God. That's how I think that Christians should start approaching the great debate. They should not start approaching these atheists where, okay, well, oh, you disbelieve? Let me prove to you this. No, instead it should be, here's the facts, whether you like it or not. If you disagree with it, refute the facts, refute the evidence, and let's see you offer your alternative.
Absolutely. And we have Darwin's deity here.
Yeah.
How you doing, man, first of all? And also, I gotta yeah, something to say real quick. Go ahead.
No, I'm doing fine. I just want to say that proof and evidence is that which comports to the atheist assumptions about the nature of reality.
Yeah,
evidence is not something that is objectively determined. So evidence and proof is whatever comports or coheres with their either assumptions or the beliefs based upon their assumptions.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I want to ask you about something real quick. Like when they say, see, this hangout, if you didn't notice, is my top 5 most terrible atheist arguments. And True and I agree, and I'm sure you agree as well, that there are many, many more than 5. But I just compiled, like, in my personal opinion, the top 5 bad ones they give. And the number 1 that I put was extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And the reason why I think that is so bad is because, number 1, the thing to the individual, what would be extraordinary evidence anyway? That's the first thing. That has to be properly defined. And number 2, even if we were going to say something is considered to be extraordinary, who says that extraordinary evidence is required for it? Or maybe just evidence in general is required for it. Like I said, for example, if like a man comes up to you and he tells you that he survived a 47-story fall, and you'd be like, well, what's the evidence for that? You think that dude would have made an extraordinary claim, right? But the evidence he gives you for that extraordinary claim is he shows you a report on the incident that happened. There was no actual recording of his fall or anything like that, but there was a report on what happened, and the doctors who looked at the case and checked out the man, and everything checks out. It confirms it was him, but nobody would say that the report in general was extraordinary evidence. It would just be evidence that said event happened. So when they say extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, I think it's just a load of hogwash. It's just garbage.
As always, the atheists and the skeptics are bringing out cliches and slogans. They don't really have much substance to them. Okay, so when they say extraordinary claim, okay, what all that simply is they're borrowing from, I believe it was Carl Sagan who came up with that. These are catchphrases. These are slogans like McDonald's, you deserve a break today, or I'm loving it. Okay, there's not much substance to there. Now, when they talk about evidence, we have to discuss what is evidence. Now, all observations are theory laden. Okay? We have a sensory experience, like we see something, and then we form a conclusion based upon that sensory experience from the framework of a web of beliefs that we have. We have a collection of beliefs that we have adopted about the nature of reality. We therefore make a conclusion from that web of beliefs following a sensory experience. Okay? And that's what we would call evidence or not evidence. So evidence is not something that is neutral or objective. Now, it might be the case that if I see a gun on the floor, that my conclusion, which is a product of a web of beliefs, could comport with what actually is in reality. But that doesn't change the fact that all observations are inherently theory laden. Suppose that it turns out at all it's not a gun. It's a piece of chocolate that looks like a gun.
Right.
But from a distance, I concluded based upon my web of beliefs that it was a gun.
Yeah, like for example, somebody there was an incident where it was a while back, or somebody had a fake gun, but it looked like a real gun to a cop. And from a distance, you can't tell whether that gun was real or fake. So they have to treat the situation equally as if they had a real gun.
Well, here's the overarching problem: is atheists will say they would have us believe that they would believe in God if they just had some evidence. Okay.
Right.
Now the problem with that is they are going out on record and saying there is no evidence for God. Now, how are they able to determine that that is the case? You understand what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So I was talking with an atheist last night, and he says, "Well, I lack belief in God." I go, "Oh, well, why?" He goes, "Well, because there's no evidence for God." And I said, "Does that include the universe?" And he said, "Yes." I go, "Good. How did you determine that the universe could not possibly be a creation of God?" I said, are you able to determine that no God exists?" And he said, "No." I said, "Good. Are you able to determine what did produce the universe in such a way that you cannot be wrong?" And he said, "No." And I said, "Is there a third option?" He said, "No." I said, "Good. Then if you can't demonstrate,
Hold on a second. I got to take care of something.
Okay. While he waits, while we wait for him to get back, there's so many bad arguments, and like he said, the whole bit about certain catchphrases that they mentioned, like extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, that's just a cliche. And I also agree with both of my brothers said that we've allowed them, as Christians, we've allowed them to get away with this type of stuff for way, way too long. They have said for many, many years that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And even me, myself, was guilty of this. And I would just like approach it like, well, maybe they actually have a point there. Maybe if I'm making an extraordinary claim, I will have to give extraordinary evidence. But when you really think about it and closely, really check out what they're saying, it's like, well, wait a minute. Since when did extraordinary claims, whatever that means, or however they define that, would necessarily require extraordinary evidence? I mean, if a claim is said to be extraordinary, how about that we just produce evidence? It doesn't mean that this evidence will have to be necessarily extraordinary, whatever the heck that even means. So yes, believers for way too long have allowed atheists to get away with catchphrases and cliches and not really closely analyze what they're saying. But the good news is Christians are getting smarter and better in dealing with their nonsense. So, and there's so many things that you have to watch out for if you are a believer talking to an atheist. Watch out for these sorts of cliche catchphrases and slogans, because like Dee said, they're really just on par with "I'm loving it" or "Have you had your break today?" They're really that insignificant and that meaningless. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Says who? And as Dee also pointed out, that's something Carl Sagan said years ago. And atheists over many years just repeat that and repeated that and repeated that. And a lot of Christians didn't challenge that or hadn't challenged that for many, many years. Or at least I'm not aware of any challenges that was given to that particular cliche. Yeah, you're really thinking about some of these things that they say. They really have no basis for what they're arguing. It's just like True said. It's just it's just assertion after assertion. They're really not given any objective basis for these things, and the foundations they argue are question begging. To say the least. Like again, it goes back to the statement: extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. That's just a question-begging statement. It's just a circular argument. There's really no validity to that statement at all. I'm pretty sure that there are many things which have happened throughout time and history, which could be categorized as extraordinary, but yet did not require extraordinary evidence to back such things. As I said, if a dude came up to you who fell off a 47-story building and said, "Yeah, I fell off a 47-story building and survived," and you asked for evidence of that, and you showed them the report, and yes, there was a man who actually fell off a 47-story building. Well, I don't know if the building was 47 stories, but he fell 47 stories and survived. And there's just a news report on it that was reported in ABC like in 2007-ish. It wasn't any camera or anything that recorded his actual fall or anything like that.
Okay.
But just
Antonio.
story.
Antonio.
Yeah.
When you're dealing with unbelievers, you need to pull the rug out from underneath them, and it's quite easy to do.
Well, yeah,
they will make assertions. They will make assertions about the nature of reality. How do you know this? Okay. When they start invoking scientific concepts, observing consistencies and not observing inconsistencies does not logically necessitate they will continue into the future. So when unbelievers refer to things of a scientific nature, they are just appealing to popular beliefs.
Yeah.
From a skeptical worldview. Well, that's the way everybody thinks it is. Okay, so what? So when they want to appeal to physics or chemistry, you just simply say this: are you asserting that there are laws of physics and chemistry that are prescriptive and not descriptive?
Yeah.
They cannot defend that the laws of physics and chemistry are prescriptive, even though they devoutly believe it. Okay? You say, how are you able to verify that events that are beyond your immediate experience conform and are consistent with the events that you see? They can't do it. All they can simply say is, well, that's the way it's always been, and I don't see any deviation from those consistencies. Okay, fine. So what? That doesn't mean that it will logically and necessarily continue into the future.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Now, from a Christian worldview, we can stand upon God's revelation, where we don't even question the uniformity of nature, because God has made it innate in us not to question it. Okay? God did not make human beings so that, well, we just might surmise that there's a uniformity of nature. Unless somebody has some organic brain problems, nobody really questions the uniformity of nature. So when they appeal to science, you need to go after their root beliefs. They want evidence for God? Mr. Atheist, give me your evidence that the uniformity of nature exists. They can't do it.
Yeah, exactly.
And if they say, well, I couldn't function otherwise, then you say, well, by you claiming that functionality is to assume the uniformity of nature, and that you have to make choices that comport with the way things function. So when you say I couldn't function otherwise, you're just using circular reasoning to assume the uniformity of nature when you say I can't function otherwise. You see, they want to come to the table and say they want extraordinary evidence for extraordinary claims. Good. What is your evidence for the core things that you believe? And at the end of the day, they have none. Why do you think they hate me? Why do you think they hate me with a passion? And they say, he's reading from a script. No, I'm not. I'm just saying, if you're going to make certain claims about the nature of reality and you're going to reject that this world is a product of the God of the Bible, then tell me what is the basis for you to make any claims about reality that assumes the uniformity of nature.
Exactly.
Or that this universe is rationally apprehendable.
I tell you why they hate
questions.
You, Doc. Well, I'll tell you why they hate you, Doc, because they hate you because of the reason why they hate any stronger brother in Christ here on YouTube. They're so used to making assertions and just criticizing and pointing fingers at people, because it's easier to doubt and point the finger at people and criticize than it is to think and give an answer to certain things. And when you press them and you back them into a corner, you damage their ego, because they think of themselves more highly than they should be thinking of themselves.
No. Yeah.
Yeah, I gotta read this particular comment here. Tell me what y'all think of this. I already know what to say to it, but I just want to know what y'all think. It says, if the proposition God exists is not falsifiable, then there can't be evidence for it. Hold on. It was
good. Okay, good. Then there can't be evidence.
It was actually more to that comment.
Okay, well, first of all, in philosophy, they don't even discuss the falsification. Okay, this is a smokescreen. So, Mr. Atheist, do you have evidence for the core things that you believe in about reality? Like for the Christian, we believe that our ultimate core belief is that there's an omnipotent, omniscient God who upholds all things by the power of his will. So they say, well, can you falsify that? Is there an observation that would falsify that? Otherwise, there can't be evidence for it. I say, okay, good. Mr. Atheist, are you consistent in applying this criterion for core beliefs?
That doesn't even seem to be related, though.
And well, first of all,
what is
there's two problems here, Antonio. There's two problems. One, when they request falsification for God and say, are you being arbitrary when you want God to be falsifiable in order for the evidence for him? Do you hold to the criterion of falsifiability for the core things that you believe in?
Right.
Do you have a double standard for the God of the Bible versus the core beliefs that you have about the nature of reality? Are the laws of logic falsifiable?
Right. Just because can nobody prove that God doesn't exist, which I would assume they think isn't falsifiable in that sense, doesn't mean that there can't be evidence for God.
Here's the problem. But look, the only way there can be evidence is if God exists. If God doesn't exist, then evidence is only that which comports to your chosen assumptions. That's all that would be. Right? Now,
that's an interesting way to look at it.
Well, that's what exactly evidence would be from a skeptic's worldview. Evidence is not something objective out there that we cite. So
Oh,
when
is
they
that
ask
what
for
you talk about theory-laden observations and whatnot? Is that
yeah. Well, this is well known in the philosophy of science, and something that the more intelligent skeptics will want to avoid, but the stupid skeptics don't have a clue as to what I'm talking about. But observations are inherently theory-laden, okay? So the point is, one's observation and conclusion would be only as good as your underlying assumptions or your web of beliefs, your network of beliefs. You see, when you form a conclusion about even one single thing, let's say you're walking across along the sidewalk and you see a cheeseburger with a McDonald's wrapper on it, and you go, oh, somebody dropped a McDonald's cheeseburger. That conclusion is the product of a web of beliefs that you have about the nature of reality, not just a single belief. There's a web of beliefs. And this is easily demonstrated. Now, they can't avoid this. So the stupid ones won't want to discuss it because they don't understand it. And the smart ones won't want to discuss it because it undermines the credibility of their position. So when they ask for God to be falsifiable, say, do you hold to that? Are you consistent? Are you being arbitrary when you apply that to God? And are your core beliefs about the nature of reality falsifiable? Well, no, they're properly basic beliefs, they say. Oh, okay, so why do your core beliefs about the nature of reality, why is it okay for you to have them as starting points and they're not falsifiable, but you demand that God be falsifiable?
exactly? It's a double standard.
Now here's the second problem. Here's the second problem. Second problem is, in order to falsify something, the laws of logic would have to be absolute and universal. In other words, the law of non-contradiction would have to be true at all times and all places. Okay? So, Mr. Skeptic, are you affirming from your worldview that the law of non-contradiction is true in all times and all places? And then they'll try to weasel out with it and say, well, it couldn't be otherwise. Say, how do you know?
Exactly.
Now, so is the law of non-contradiction falsifiable? No, they'll just say, well, it's incorrigible. It couldn't be otherwise. Well, how do you know this? It's that simple. All right. The third problem is that in order to falsify something, you have to be able to verify something in such a way that you cannot be wrong. Otherwise, you don't have absolute falsification. So there are three serious and fundamental problems when atheists or skeptics invoke falsification.
Yeah, and it seems to me, even if we don't use a presuppositionalist approach, that there doesn't even seem to be any relation between falsifiability and the existence of God. Because let's say I would, agree for the sake of argument that God couldn't be falsifiable. That doesn't mean that it couldn't be evidence for his existence. You can still have evidence for his existence and him not be falsifiable. Even if I agree to that, what does that have to do with evidence for his existence? I just don't see the relationship there at all. Say, okay, you want to get 2 points in here? I'll try to see.
How are you guys doing today?
I'm not bad.
I was just typing because I've got like several. I actually was working, and I'll take a little break so I'm not dividing my attention here, and then I'll go in a bit here. Yeah, I just didn't want to forget my 2 points. Although the second one, when I'd asked for the link, about 30 seconds later, I think Dee actually made the exact point that I was about to make. So it may have been addressed. Yeah, the extraordinary evidence one. It's an interesting phrase, and it's one of those phrases. I kind of like the comparison to like a motto or a slogan, because it has that feel to it. That extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and there's a certain cachet to it. I think it kind of speaks to something that we all recognize as intuitively correct. But boy, a guy doesn't want to, apply it really strictly, like somehow it has some really strict meaning. I know there's been some sort of improvements or modifications to it. And it's funny because I'm sure I've used the phrase too, but they're probably one of the more vocal YouTubers who's really opposed that phrase has been DPR Jones. He's a lawyer in practice in the United Kingdom. and he's
That's
asked the
shocking.
question. He's what?
I said that's shocking.
Well, it's shocking. Why is that?
I would never have surmised that he was a lawyer, given the way he reasons on camera.
Okay.
This is the real Veckle, by the way. Just letting you guys know. Okay, go ahead.
The real Veckle. Well, anyway,
yes.
The one and only Veckle.
I think you should. Yeah, you should. Just go by that name from now on. Anyway, what I think is funny. Several years ago, I heard him talking with some people, and he said this thing. He goes, "What exactly is extraordinary evidence?" And it's funny because I remember thinking, like, well, it's obvious what that means. And then when he was like, "Look, we deal in evidence all the time. I mean, evidence is a major part of how trials work." And he says, like, "There's evidence is evidence. Like what is meant by extraordinary evidence?" And it sort of got my wheels turning on it. And so I agree. It's not a phrase that can be used to sort of have some real serious application. And I guess I'll say, and by the way, this is all in the context. Sometimes Antonio holds these hangouts where it's like bad arguments. I love his bad arguments hangouts because it gives me a chance to pop in and to say, by the way, if there are atheists who are watching this, if you're going to use one of these arguments, try to up your game. This is one point I'd like to see people up their game on. If you're going to be in a discussion and you go to make this point, well, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, don't use that as a mic drop moment. Like you've now somehow won something because you use this phrase that Carl Sagan had said, because it's certainly not a really, really powerful statement. So it's a
Many of them don't even know Sagan said it.
I would, sorry, I'm trying to remember who it was. I heard somebody say it was Matt Dillahunty who said it.
Yeah, well, he's ripping it off from Sagan.
No, well, I don't know that Matt Dillahunty. It's certainly alarming, right? It's sort of, I'm trying to think of another example, like when there's a very famous phrase and then you're like, oh, well, Captain Kirk said that on Star Trek. You're just like, oh, and that's so well read. There is an interesting revision to it. I think I couldn't remember who wrote it, so to not misinform people, I looked it up. It's Laplace modified it to say the weight of evidence for an extraordinary claim must be proportioned to its strangeness. And I think that's a more helpful telling of it. But then I think it still raises the same objection of what is meant by strangeness. I would take that to mean that when it's something that departs from the mundane, and I don't know that we're going to talk about this for too long, so I think I'm just sort of restating a lot of what Antonio was saying, and as an example of somebody claiming to have fallen from a 40-foot, if you told me you had bacon with breakfast, I mean, I'm not really going, I'm not really going to question that because people do that. Falling, I mean, I guess it could happen. Falling the 47 stories is a little bit weird. But the one thing that I would seek to add, and let me end on this point, is that in terms of how much evidence you're going to seek, the weight of evidence you're going to seek to meet some claim, I think part of what's on the scales intuitively, and yet for some reason we don't articulate this, is about the importance of the claim. Because you could tell me that you ate bacon for breakfast, or you ate some exotic marine creature that few people ever get. And I don't really care. Like, I'm not that invested. I mean, I'd be interested. You're a nice person. Okay, great. I'm glad you told me what you had for breakfast. It's interesting. But do I really need to probe into it? Do I need to demand some weight of evidence from you? And the answer, I think, should hinge on how important the thing is. Is it really important to me to have some weight of evidence supporting some claim you made about your breakfast? But this is a different matter if you're selling, yeah. If you're at my door and you're trying to sell me a life insurance policy, now I got some investment into knowing the truth about these claims. Is this really a good policy? Is it really going to pay out, or is this a fly by night? Or like the thing where the guy comes by and says, "Oh, I'm fixing some roofs in the neighborhood, and I noticed you got some loose shingles. I can fix yours." Well, then I want to be, even though it's a fairly mundane thing, people do fix roofs all the time. That's a fairly mundane thing. That's not an extraordinary claim. But I'm going to want some verification that you're actually a legitimate contractor and that you do know how to fix roofs and that you're actually going to do it.
What would constitute verification in your worldview?
Well, I'm not interested in you grilling me with a bunch of questions. I just want to,
Well, you said you would want verification. What does that mean to you?
Well, in that case, the roofer, I'd need to be able to form a contract with the roofer where I don't have to pay him everything up front, or that there's some way he can perhaps provide references from other people that have had their roofs fixed by him, something like that.
I'm talking about in a general sense.
Yeah, well, I'm talking about fixing roofs right now. So you don't need it. Not Darwin's. Not every conversation has to turn into a fist fight.
I'm not making a fist fight. I ask you how you're using the term verification.
I think he's just asking standard questions. I don't think he was trying to.
Yeah.
No,
Atheists talk about verification and evidence all the time, but we don't really know exactly what they mean by it.
Well, obviously, for whatever claim or sorry, in this case, you're not talking about beliefs. Whatever. I mean, I was hoping somebody would respond to my point about the extraordinariness of the evidence. Doesn't really make much sense. But actually, what's on the scales is how important it is to you that you have the accurate information. I was hoping somebody would respond to that point.
Well, I actually agree with that. That there is a certain level of importance with the claim. As I'm not going to really care about what you ate for breakfast, and I'm not going to ask you to verify that. But yeah, if you claim you survived the fall for 47 stories. Or off a 47-story building, then y'all might be a little bit more interested in having you verify it. Yeah, there's definitely a level of importance with certain claims. I agree with that.
Right, but if because it is extraordinary, so I guess that would sort of ramp up your need for a weight of evidence. But I'm saying then, what if you had a tumor or something, you needed to go for some surgery? Is it then, even though surgery is fairly mundane, would you have a higher or lower standards, like for a weight of evidence, to know that this surgery you're choosing amongst different options? And one surgeon tells you, well, if we do this type of surgery, you're going to have like a 98% chance of coming out just fine. What kind of weight of evidence would you need in that situation, right? And what I'm suggesting is, and I'm surprised that this isn't mentioned as something that's on the scales, is that when the belief that you're trying to form is something that's really, really important to you, that's when you're really going to be seeking evidence for something. I'm less concerned about what you had for breakfast. I'm intrigued, but not terribly concerned about whether or not you have a cousin that fell off a building. But if you're making an important decision, like buying an insurance policy or choosing surgery, then you sort of feel a sense of responsibility to demand a weight of evidence. And I'm just remarking that I'm surprised that as much as people talk about extraordinary this, extraordinary that they fail to mention that really when we demand a high weight of evidence is when the conclusion is something that's vitally important.
But let's say if the evidence that you gave them was the news report, like there was actually a dude who fell 47 stories and survived, and there was just a news report. If that was literally the only evidence he gave, we wouldn't think a news report was extraordinary, but nonetheless, it clearly proves it was him, and it shows the doctors that checked out his case and everything. If that was all he gave, would that be insufficient evidence? We wouldn't define it as extraordinary, but it would nonetheless confirm what he was saying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would probably, based on that, I would probably, again, it depends what you mean by news report, because if it was on News Thump or The Onion, well, then we would know, well, okay, that's silly. But like, you mean that can actually
like mainstream media, ABC News.
Yeah. Yeah, in that case, I would, I mean, my conclusion, not to be over wordy about it, but I would accept the belief that this person fell 47 stories. I would accept it tentatively, but not that guardedly. I think I would accept it with a high degree of confidence, because those things do happen. They're extremely rare. And look, you know, it's got to happen once in a while. And generally when it does, it makes the news. And sure enough, there's a news story. And at the end of the day, it really doesn't perturb me that much if I'm wrong about it. I mean, I would like that if I then told somebody down the road that, oh yeah, I heard this story about this guy that fell, that I was telling a true story. But honestly, it's no skin off my nose if I repeat some old wives' tale that isn't really true.
Yeah. My only point is, I just don't find it a necessity that if a claim is said to be extraordinary, that would necessarily have to have extraordinary evidence to back it up. That's my only point.
The bottom line is that a claim just needs evidence. That's all it comes down to. I mean, who's to sit over there and say that?
What is evidence? Evidence is that which conforms or coheres with somebody's baseline assumptions and their beliefs that are built upon their assumptions.
Right.
So evidence is not something that is objective.
Right. I mean, who's going to sit over here and say that the belief in God is some sort of extraordinary claim to begin with, right? I mean, most people, as far as I'm aware of, I mean, the majority of the planet believe in God. And even people that I know that are probably in between that you can consider agnostic, they're open to to God being behind life as well. So, I mean, they don't view it as some sort of extraordinary claim, just a possibility based on what they're seeing in nature. So it's not like, it's just a matter of subjective interpretation of what is extraordinary. There's no baseline where we can all, agree upon.
Right, and it seems like, just real quick, I just got a quick comment, you can go. There's certain irrational atheists that I've talked to that basically treat like talking about God in general as an extraordinary thing, as if their standard for what they would accept is so high, and they'll treat almost any claim about God as an extraordinary claim that would require extraordinary evidence. And I'm not saying all atheists do this. I've just come across those atheists who look at the God concept in general as extraordinary.
Well, it's just a cliche and a slogan. That's all.
Yeah. Can I react to that point about the? I think it was Trude was making a point about the extraordinariness, and I do like this revision where they talk about the strangeness of it. Although, as I said when I read that out, that was Laplace's sort of restatement of it, where he talks about the strangeness of a claim. And I said, but I still think that term even needs to be defined. I'm sorry, Dawkins, can I get you to mute while I'm talking? I'm hearing. I don't know if it's the echo or it's just a chirpy noise. Okay. The is what's meant by strangeness, and I think that the strangeness of a claim is sort of the unfamiliarity to your routine experiences. So if you told me something different about, if you said, well, all the people of Haiti have the ability to levitate and fly or something like that, I would think, well, I've never been to Haiti, so I don't know what goes on there. But my familiarity with people overall around the world is that that's not really something that happens. So I would consider that a very, very strange claim. And I'm sure we could all come up with examples of things that we would consider to be mundane versus strange. But I do like your point about the sort of the subjectiveness of what's meant by strange, because if you came and told me that the world was created by, and then insert whatever strange claim here. I'm not going to waste your time crafting some weird one, that some aliens came and they had spaceships and they were like construction things and they had blueprints, and I'd be like, I don't know anybody that believes that. You're the first person to ever tell me that. I find that claim very strange, that is extraordinary or outside the ordinary. Or if you were somebody who never heard of any sort of divinity or deity or creator God at all, and this is a hard thing to put yourself in the shoes of. Can you imagine, like, who would you know that you bumped into that would never have heard of God before? Well then, yes, the God claim would be very strange. But I recognize the strangeness the other way around, where your whole life you've just known that this world was placed. I was used in the phrase in Hangouts before. I remember being taught that God hung the moon. And it's not literally about the moon. It's about everything where it is. This is what God has done for us. You being here and you embarking on this journey is what God has done. God hung the moon. God placed you here to go through these things, and the world was created by God. So the first time that somebody comes up and says, well, I don't really believe in the God thing, I actually believe that there was, and then whatever insert explanation here about what happened pre-Big Bang, or and then abiogenesis and the perceived diversity, the observed diversity of life because of common ancestry, and we're actually cousins. I would just think that's a strange claim, right? And let me shorten that a little bit. What I mean to say is, regardless of what you know or don't know about science or about creation or whatever else, you're just a person living your life. You've grown up in a community and in a family where you know that God hung the moon. Everything is here because of God. When somebody tells you, well, no, there's no God, to me, that is a very, very strange claim to somebody raised in those circumstances. So the strangeness of a claim, let me wrap on this point, the strangeness of a claim is very much tied to the circumstances and the context in which that claim is made.
Well, there's a lot that I need to hit on with all this stuff. I mean, for example, I didn't come from a strict Christian background. There were some people in my grandparents, they believed in Christianity, but my mother, for example, the household that I grew up in, she was more so into some occultish and pagan type of views. She would read tarot cards, cast runes, those types of things. I grew up with her doing those types of things. Actually, people from all over the place would come to her so she could do readings for certain people. She would actually make some decent money doing that. But the point being is that my background that I come from, I didn't really come from a strict Christian background, but still Christianity was, the claims of Christianity were not like some sort of strange or unfamiliar view. Why? Well, because I think we can see why. There's something that is inside of mankind, I believe. I mean, you look at the 7,200,000,000 people on the planet, almost all of us have some sort of belief system that has to do with the supernatural. 23% or so are Muslims, and another 33% are Christians. So a little over half the planet's population actually have some sort of Islamic or atheistic belief or view. That's excluding Judaism. But after that, you have all these other different supernatural beliefs and views, and only about 3% to 6 or 7% are actually atheists on the planet. So the majority of the planet's population seem to have some sort of supernatural belief or view, and they differ in different ways. But I think it goes on to show that we all have, it seems that we all have some sort of inner understanding of the supernatural. And so claims like this, they're not really unfamiliar to us. But when we're talking about the unfamiliar, I mean, how does that relate to intelligent design? Because when we're looking at things inside of nature, it still doesn't seem to be at all an outrageous claim or a strange claim to conclude that, you know what, life was created, because we're seeing certain patterns, even outside of the fact of looking at, you know, from the ID perspective on a molecular level with the machines inside of the cell, just the way that certain things are put together in nature in general. There are more than enough reasons for us to conclude that life was created at the same time. So it's not like there was some sort of outrageous, ridiculous, strange claims that's related to this. But I just want to really hit on this point right here that I think is really, really important, that the assertion that any of these claims, the life being created or the supernatural claims, is just because it's unfamiliar, it's you know, somehow outrageous or strange, or it requires extraordinary evidence or some sort of unique evidence in some way. I think that that's a silly assertion that is only being asserted from an atheistic subjective doubt. And I brought this up earlier. I think that, yes, all we really need to do is actually provide evidence. That's it. And it's not that the atheist doubts that we're like going to go try to prove to the atheist, oh, look at, this is the evidence. This is the truth right here. I think that we're really supposed to do is just provide the evidence, let people hear the evidence, and let the evidence stand on its own merits, not on the subjective interpretation or accusation of the atheist, who just, of course, is going to doubt.
Well, I would, I don't know if this is going to get us anywhere, but just to at least go on record with it, I agree with everything you just said, up to the point about your characterization of the atheists and the role that doubt plays in atheists. And I don't know that I'm really in the mood to argue about it, but I just want to put it out there that I disagree with that characterization, that atheists aren't sort of doubting fairly, or they're not processing evidence. The reason why I'd kind of shy away from an argument about that is because I recognize biblical support for that position, that atheists aren't really processing the evidence because they can't, they're not in the right place to do it. And you know, you can talk about the unrighteousness and things like that. I just want to go on record. I disagree with that characterization that atheists are sort of approaching it in the way that you just characterized it.
Well, I mean, it's true. I mean, right? I mean, it's deceptive for us to put anybody in a position because they say they just disbelieve, and somehow we're supposed to, you know, give them the evidence that they subjectively think is going to be valid. So, I mean, it doesn't matter how many times I come to with evidence that I find convincing, or 1,000 people behind me or 200,000 behind me also find convincing. If I speak to an atheist who subjectively doubts and has got his own brand of what he thinks is going to be valid evidence, well, you might as well flush everything that you say down the toilet to him, because That's
Yeah,
not
it's that.
what he's looking for. So it's the point being is that none of us. It's not it's not that I'm making a claim, therefore I don't have the burden of proof. I still have the burden of proof for my claim. But I think the point is that just because the atheist doubts my claim, I think it's deceptive for the theist or anybody who's making any sort of claim to prove to the atheist, because if you have somebody that has an alternative system of beliefs or views, which has led him to disbelieving in your ideas, those alternative views are going to keep him from considering anything that you say anyway. So that's the deception here, that just because somebody says that they doubt and just because we do have the burden of proof doesn't mean that we are intending to prove to the atheist our claims. We are just attempting to present our evidence out here and to let people who are going to hear it, come to their own conclusions on it. Not
Yeah, it's that's the point I disagree on is when you say something like, well, we should just take this, presenting this information to atheists, we might as well just take it and flush it down the toilet. I disagree with that sort of a characterization of it. And again, I understand and accept that's tied to points in theology, and also I'll even acknowledge that it's reinforced by things that have happened in your experience in conversation with atheists. So I get that, but you got to understand
Did you
that.
say flush it down the
well,
toilet?
that's not true.
Is that what you said?
Well, yeah, well, that is what I said, but I don't think, just really quick before you respond, that this has anything to do with theology. I just think that it has to do with the issue of claims, burden of proof, and subjective dealings with of evidence.
Okay, well, I can touch on that issue then.
Yeah, I was temporarily distracted with something. I didn't hear the flush down the toilet part. So yeah my bad.
Yeah. Well, let me touch on one point that you sort of had said in passing, where you said, what was it? Not the flush it down the toilet thing, but no, I'm going to lose it. Oh, convincing. That was it. When you were talking about presenting evidence that you find convincing, other Christians find convincing, and yet an atheist can then just shrug his shoulders and say, I don't find that convincing. And you kind of point to this different standard and what would be convincing. Let me challenge you a little bit on that idea. I don't think that you've presented evidence or arguments that you find convincing. And just before you don't try not to knee-jerk react to that, what I mean is, and I'm sort of reflecting on my experiences in talking with theists online, is that they'll quite often come to you with information, evidence, arguments that they will present as like, look, this is a really good argument, or this is really compelling, convincing information. And I mean, they don't present it because they think it's garbage, right? I mean, I don't, generally speaking, I don't encounter theists who sort of come up with some, goofball argument, then they're like, I'm just going to pitch this, it's garbage, but who cares? You're an atheist, you're going to hell anyway. Generally speaking, theists approach, I think, quite honestly with this idea that what I'm bringing is important information, important evidence, and it's a compelling argument. And if you ask the question like, well, I mean, am I supposed to be convinced by this? And they'll say, well, I find it convincing. I know you won't find it convincing because of your state. And they might refer to unrighteousness or reprobate or all these other biblical terms that will sort of serve as easy excuses for why I'm not jumping into this thing. But this is the specific point I want to challenge you on. Do you really find this evidence or arguments convincing? And what I mean by that is I'm not asking you to assess, should it be convincing to some other reasonable person? I'm saying, is it the thing that convinced you? So just to pick directly on one of the points that true empiricism you and I have discussed, and you've discussed with a number of people, is, for example, you'll talk about ATP synthase, and I understand that it's not just the ATP synthase. That's part of a larger argument, and we sort of get bogged down in the details of it, but that's part of a larger argument. And what I want to ask you is, when you learned about ATP synthase, did you fall to your knees and repent and accept Jesus Christ into your heart? Or is it the case that you already believed and you already accepted Christ into your heart? So let me, and so I can take all of what I'm just saying and I can cram it into one little package here, because this is what I'm getting at. When you say that an argument is convincing, I think you mean to say that to you it sounds like a good argument and it should be convincing to some other reasonable person. But that's not the thing that actually convinced you. If you reflect on your own conversion experience, very, very powerful experience, it wasn't it wasn't a William Lane Craig argument. It wasn't looking at DNA or beta clamps or any of that stuff, right? It was something else. So that what I'm getting at here is the thing that you actually found convincing is that experience, and not the information that you're bringing to us.
What do you
that
think was
say
my
ought to be
experience?
convincing.
But
What do you
I
think
mean,
my experience?
I don't know. I don't know.
But what does that mean, though? You may have been convinced for something else, but that doesn't mean it's
Right.
not a good argument. And on top of that, other people might have been convinced with the argument you're giving.
Right, and that's kind of the point, man. I mean, I think the point is dealing with evidence or arguments that we're giving. I mean, we can approach it from philosophical perspectives. People use the presuppositional arguments. We can approach all of this from the design perspective or young earth creationist perspective or the Kalam cosmological argument. There can be a variety of different reasons as to why it causes somebody to believe. So I don't really think that there's really a point being made that just because it is true that me knowing about or talking about anything that ATP synthase isn't the reason why I came to believe. It's an accumulation of things. When you're not going to understand the things of the Holy Spirit, because the scripture says, no man knoweth the things of a man, save the spirit of the man that's in him, and no man knoweth the things of God, save the spirit of God. So in order to understand the things of God, like the Holy Spirit, as the scripture says, he leads you and guides you into all truth, you're going to have the spirit of God in you to be guiding you anyway. So I just wanted to throw that out there. But there's other things inside of scripture as well that sort of led me to believe and to support Christianity and become a Christian. One of these, for example, I mean, there's just one of many, many, many. Look outside of the Old Testament, I believe where it talks about how the Messiah was going to be pierced through his hands and his feet. That was written about 400 years before the Phoenicians actually invented it. Shortly after that, the Romans borrowed it from the Phoenicians. 600 years later, Christ actually died on the cross. This was 1,000 years before Jesus Christ even died on the cross, 400 years before the crucifixion was even invented. And the Bible prophesied how the Messiah was going to be pierced through his hands and through his feet. And what's interesting about that is that the Jews at that time, they didn't believe that there was going to be, that this was how the Messiah was going to come, that he was going to come and die on the cross. They viewed things completely different than how Christ came when he died on the cross. And there's other passages as well where it talks about, for example, unto us a son will be given, and the government shall be upon his shoulders, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, the Everlasting Father, and the Prince of Peace. I mean, it's talking about Christ being God, that's going to be referred to as the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace, and he's going to be the son that's going to be given. There's passages all over Scripture that are in separate books over the span of 1,000 to a couple thousand years. You look at the scrolls that they found. What is it, 150 years BC? It's around 2,300 to 2,200 years ago. Some of the passages that's outside of the Bible that confirm some of the passages in the Old Testament. I mean, there's just a line of evidence all over the place that actually led me to believe that Jesus Christ was Lord. So I don't think that it matters whether or not the creation argument wasn't the actual argument that led me to Christ, because the point being here is that regardless of what evidence is going to be given, we shouldn't allow that evidence to be interpreted by the atheist's subjective doubt. That's the point. Now, that doesn't mean, yeah.
I think it goes back to the quote, which says, it is said that an argument is what convinces reasonable men, and a proof was what it takes to convince even an unreasonable man.
Although I think we all know that even there's some people, it doesn't matter what evidence or proof you put in front of them, that's not how they decide. But sorry, go ahead, Darren.
True. You have to keep in mind, people use the word evidence as though it's something objective. Evidence is that which comports to one's web of beliefs. Okay? So when a skeptic says, give me proof or evidence, then all they're simply saying, whether they realize it or not, and more often than not, they don't realize it, tell me something that will comport with my chosen web of beliefs.
Yeah, they're just saying what evidence would be acceptable to them.
Because you see, if you don't start from the Christian God, then there is no proof or verification or falsification. All you have are conclusions that are the product of our chosen web of beliefs. That's it.
On that note, can I give you another example of what I think is a bad argument that I think the non-believers who want to participate in the conversation should really up their game. And the timing is good because I know this is, G-Man just joined us, and I know this is one of G-Man's pet peeves. So I'll just say what it is. When I hear the phrase, there is no evidence for God, it's quite often, again, it's not a good mic drop line. If you're ever asked, well, why are you an atheist? If you say, I mean, sometimes you kind of want to just caption it. You want to just give it the headline. You don't want to, be long-winded. So you'll just say, oh, well, why don't I believe? You say, well, it's because I just don't see any evidence for God. I think that's okay as sort of an introductory caption where you're saying, really, the explanation for my lack of belief in God can be summarized by this line. But that's not the conversation ender. If you say, well, there's no evidence for God, you can't possibly mean that there is literally no evidence that is consistent with a God-filled view of the world. That to me makes no sense.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's a mistake that people make when they use the word evidence. What is evidence? We use this word, evidence for. This is evidence for the defendant's guilt. This is evidence for the defendant's innocence. And I don't know that evidence is evidence for this or against this, or evidence against, this is evidence against the theory that it's bad to put fluoride in the water, right? We talk about evidence for and against. And I mean, evidence, they're supposed to just be, facts, but we tend to talk about evidence supporting one position or another. I try to, as much as possible, use the word evidence when you're talking about different, possible theoretical accounts or different beliefs. I try to use the word evidence as evidence consistent with some belief or evidence inconsistent with some belief. So, if you had some drug that's supposed to treat some condition and you took 1,000 people and you gave 500 of them the drug and 500 of them an identical looking placebo, and you could show, well, gee, and all 500 of the people that took this drug, their disease went away, and in all 500 of the disease went away, and only 10 of the other 500 that took the placebo, that would be evidence consistent with the belief that this drug is actually helpful in treating this thing. So I try to use, even though it's a little bit more wordy, I try to use the word evidence that way. I say evidence that is consistent with the theory or not consistent with the theory. And the reason is it gets you out of some conversational jams like, I'm going to use the common ancestry thing here as an example. Is that, I mean, would you ever actually say there is no evidence for common ancestry, or there is no evidence consistent with common ancestry?
No, I would never say that.
Yeah, because if common ancestry is true, what we would expect to see is a whole bunch of different species that has some similarity with other species and has less similarity with some other species. And you know what? You look around the world, we see a whole bunch of different species, and some of these species are kind of similar, and then there's some other species.
Yeah, and you're also leaving out that what we would expect to see, that the fossil record would exemplify transition and not stasis as it does.
Okay, fascinating. The thing is, if another person held a view that God uniquely and specially created all these species, and a really good account of how that was done is found in the book of Genesis, well, then we would expect to see a bunch of different species. Some of them might look a lot like each other. Some of them would not be so much like some other species, but they would only breed after their own kind. So to say that the fact that we see the diversity of life is evidence for evolution, well, it's evidence that's not evolution, sorry, common ancestry. It's evidence that's consistent with common ancestry, but it's also evidence that's consistent with creation. So I don't think it's correct for anybody to say there is no evidence for God, or there is no evidence for the Genesis account, or there is no evidence for what was the other example used? Oh, common ancestry. Because there's lots of evidence that is consistent with, and rather sort of mundanely consistent with any of those things.
And
evidence is that which comports with somebody's web of belief.
Yeah,
but that's right. And those conclusions cannot be ultimately verified.
Okay, you know what? You keep saying that. I mean, I think the rest of us just sort of went, okay, well, he keeps saying that. But do we, Antonio? Can we explore that a little bit?
Well, you want to talk about evidence as though it were confirmable
Okay,
or
can you give me an
verifiable.
example? Okay, what do you mean by that? Can you give me an example of something that would be inconsistent with my web of beliefs that I wouldn't consider evidence? Like, I just don't know. I don't know how you're using the word evidence in that sense.
Well, atheists and skeptics like to talk about evidence to indicate God or proof. Now, in an ultimate sense, where we're using the word evidence to mean some type of an objective determination, which is not what it is in the skeptic's worldview, there can be no objective determination about a state of affairs from a skeptical worldview.
Can you do it by example, though? Because again, what you're doing, you're giving me a bunch of things about how skeptics think and what skeptics are looking for. So can you help me understand what you mean by when you use the phrase that evidence is something that comports with your web of beliefs or whatever?
Well, that's what it is. That's what it is in a skeptic's worldview. It can't be anything more.
Oh, okay. Well, actually, let's clarify that point. Are you saying that that's what evidence is? That's just really what evidence is?
No, that's what evidence is insofar. Well,
Okay,
you tend to be long-winded.
No, it's a question, so it's got to stop at some point so you can ask the question.
I'm surprised you're not hoarse.
Here we go. I'm saying, are you saying when you use this expression that evidence is consistent with your web of belief, are you saying that that is what it is, or are you saying that is what it is in the skeptic's worldview?
That's what it is in a skeptical worldview.
But not for other people.
Well, in the Christian worldview, we have a foundation of things that the Christian God has made us to know that we can build upon. In the skeptic's worldview, there can be no objective determination of anything.
Oh, okay. So you're not saying that this is the nature of evidence. You're saying that this is what it is for skeptics. Okay. Well, then I don't need to ask you about it because
it couldn't be anything else.
No, I thought you were making an interesting point that was actually connected to someone's actual beliefs in the world. But since you're not referring to either what Christians believe or what skeptics believe, I don't know what you're talking about. So I'm not. Okay.
Hogtie, you really need to work on being clear because that was very vague and generalized. The bottom line is this: is when skeptics
I'm not interested.
And people in the world.
Sorry, I'm going to be more clear.
Well,
I'm not interested.
I could care less whether you're interested or not.
Okay.
That when skeptics are talking about evidence, the bottom line is they're by their own admission there cannot be objective determination about the nature of reality either in whole or in part. So for the skeptic, evidence is just that which coheres or comports with their web of beliefs. But this is not the same in the Christian worldview. Okay, because in the Christian worldview, God has revealed certain things to us in such a way that we cannot be wrong.
Yeah, well,
not all things, but some things.
Yeah, I was briefly. You made the point several times about what evidence is, and then now that I've heard what you're talking about, I was sort of briefly interested in trying to get what you mean by that. But now that I realize that you're describing something that is literally completely disconnected from anything in my worldview or the worldview of anyone I've met.
Okay, good. Could you tell me how evidence is something other than that which comports with your web of beliefs?
I probably can't.
Okay, good. Then you just shot yourself in the foot in your.
No, I didn't. No, because your question was.
Yeah, you did. So what would evidence be then, Hogtie?
Let me finish.
We don't need you to filibuster here. We don't need you to filibuster as you normally do.
Antonio, do you mind
hold on, Hogtie. We don't need you to filibuster here. Tell us what the nature of evidence is, given your worldview. I'm a moderator in the room, Hogtie.
Okay, but he's responding. He's responding to an answer I'm not giving. So I can cut it short.
So if you object or don't accept that evidence from a skeptical worldview, evidence is simply that which comports with somebody's chosen web of beliefs. If you object to that or don't like that, then since you keep on using the term evidence, tell us what evidence is. Is evidence something that can be determined objectively, or is it something that cannot be determined objectively?
Okay, your question was whether or not I can explain to you what I meant by the nature of evidence, and my answer was probably not. You then went ahead and ran as if I was answering a different question about what I thought about the nature of evidence. What I'm saying is, Darwin's, I've seen you run this before, and you've got your shtick that you want to say. So go ahead and say it.
If you're going to be
But-
rude and obnoxious, you will be
I'm not.
ejected.
I'm
Oh,
not.
wait a minute. Are
It's
you
not going to be
saying?
tolerated in this room.
So
Now, I
wait-
asked you a
That's
question.
okay. He's
Since you
finished.
object,
It's okay.
no. What he's doing is he's doing his usual shtick that he does in the other rooms. That when I ask a question, then he comes back and he's snide and he's rude. Now, you said you didn't accept when I said that evidence for a skeptic is that which comports to their web of belief. You rejected that, but you keep on talking about evidence in the room. You've been doing so for the last half hour. So tell us what precisely evidence is. Is it something that can be objectively determined, since you reject the idea that evidence is that which comports to your web of belief? So what would evidence be?
Okay, I will tell you what I think evidence is. Evidence would include facts, and notice that lawyers will normally talk about evidence, or scientists will talk about evidence as being like observable facts. But I have taken note from being re-educated on this recently that philosophers will include arguments as a type of evidence. So evidence would be a collection of some combination of facts and arguments, and they might be loosely compared to facts. That is, they are things that are generally sort of indisputable, agreed upon things, not indisputable, rather things that are not under dispute. And then in the second sense that evidence might be used, we often use evidence not to mean a bare fact. There may be things that are bare facts. My shoes are blue. Well, that doesn't speak to any theory. We often use the term evidence to rise above the word fact, to mean it is evidence that tends to encourage belief in a particular theory or discourage belief in that theory because it's consistent with or inconsistent with.
Okay, so is any of that
collection
objectively, is any of that, after that long-windedness, is there any of it that is objectively determinable?
Well, I wonder if I couldn't discourage you from the personal insults. I understand.
Okay, you insulted me a number of times already in the room, and you have a double standard here. So well, then that would be a good idea. Then you won't get a reciprocal response. So are any evidences objectively determinable?
I don't think anything in our experience is. So
okay, so in other words, evidence is simply what people believe that comports with either their or other people's beliefs.
No, I don't know. I mean, the thing that you're saying about evidence being what comports with beliefs or not with beliefs, I want to say that's gibberish, but that's not what I mean. I don't mean to say. What I'm saying is it literally doesn't make sense to me when you say that. So I've been asking you to find other words for that.
Okay, so evidence is not something that is objectively determinable. So we can set that aside.
Yeah, what does evidence determinable mean? What is that?
What it means is that a certain state of affairs can be identified to be the case in such a way we can't be wrong.
Okay, let's try this in. I think that there's a certain state of affairs that can exist objectively. Right, so there may be.
I didn't ask you that question.
I know. I'm just trying to get some common ground on the language here, because you use the term objective and then objectively determinable. So I just want to clarify: is this what you mean? So there may be some distant star that I can't see because I don't have a powerful enough telescope, and there may be the 7th planet around this star, and it has some number of moons around it. That's an objective fact that there's a number of moons around.
How do you know that?
But exactly, that's what I'm getting at. Is it?
How would you, unless you're omniscient?
Right. So is that the distinction you're drawing?
How would an actual state of affairs be able to be determined in such a way that we cannot be wrong?
For something like that, I couldn't possibly know. I mean, I couldn't even.
Okay, good. So evidence is not objectively determinable, right?
No. I'm talking about. I'm trying to clarify what you mean by this word. Is that what you mean when you say objectively determinable? I have no access to the truth of how many moons are around that planet, around that star. So for me, it's not objectively determinable, but it's still an objective fact, right? I'm asking you a question.
How would that be derived?
No, I'm asking you a question. Is that what you mean? That's why I'm going to a hypothetical. I'm asking.
I've already explained this. Objectively determined means that we could make a determination that a state of affairs is in accordance in reality in such a way that we can't be wrong.
Okay, so but the point is that there is a state of affairs, or there are many states of affairs that could exist objectively. It could be flatly true. It could comport with reality, but not something that I would have access to. And is that the distinction you're drawing? Is that the distinction you're drawing?
I've explained myself.
Fact?
I've explained myself 3 times. I'll explain it again.
Yeah,
Something is objectively determinable if we can determine that there is a state of affairs in such a way that we can't be wrong.
Oh, so, okay, including the phrase that is, it can't be wrong. Okay, I got you. Go ahead then. Now I understand.
Yeah, that's the 4th time. So
well, you don't need to be a dick about it. I'm
not being okay. What you know? What if you do this one more time, I'm going to eject you from the room.
Well, then eject me. Like, I mean,
I'm not going to tolerate. I'm not going to tolerate.
Go ahead and make
your past abusiveness before. You see, you came in here. I asked you a question about verification. I asked you a question. Don't interrupt me. Don't interrupt me.
I don't need to.
Don't interrupt me.
Drama time.
Okay, this is what it inevitably happens. Okay, see, now what he's doing is, because he's being questioned, he's now trolling. Now, I asked you something earlier in the room. I was entirely polite to you. I asked you what you meant. What do you mean by verification? And you immediately started to say, well, this doesn't have to turn into a fist fight. Okay, so you started off the insults and the invectives here. Okay, now I've asked you several times, and I keep on getting this long-winded response. Is it objectively determinable? Now, for most people, they don't have trouble answering the question yes, no, or I don't know. But you give this long-winded dissertation where we don't know heads or tails of what you're talking about, and then you tell me I shouldn't be a dick. Now, either you believe that something can be determined in such a way that we cannot be wrong, or you don't. Which is it?
Okay, for clarity, I'll repeat my answer. Now, and again, I've given the answer no, and then you were asking some other questions about it, so I've asked for clarification. Thank you. I think I do understand your clarification. No, I don't believe that any of the matters we've been talking about here are objectively determinable. Now that I understand, I think with clarity, your definition, my answer very clearly is no. These things are not objectively determinable.
Oh, okay, good. So evidence would be that which comports with what?
Evidence would be that would comport. Okay.
Evidence is that which comports with what? People's beliefs?
No, evidence may be consistent with or inconsistent with your beliefs. Like,
okay. I'm asking you for a definition of evidence. Since you have said that evidence is not something that can be objectively determined, evidence is that which would comport with what?
I literally don't know what you're getting at, because evidence, you're clearly confounding something with something here, because
I want to make sure I heard this right.
No, I'm not confounding anything. I'm asking you a very simple question.
The evidence can be inconsistent with what one believes?
Yeah, if evidence is not an objective determination with a state of affairs in such a way that we cannot be wrong, then evidence would be that which comports or coheres with what?
Oh, you're talking about my perception of the evidence? I mean, literally, it's okay. Go ahead.
The whole time you've been in here, you've used the word evidence several dozen times. So I'm asking you, since you have rejected the idea that evidence is that which can be determined in such a way that we cannot be wrong, then when you use the word evidence, evidence would be that which comports or coheres with what? Would that be a set of beliefs? And if it's not a set of beliefs, what would it be?
Well, no, evidence doesn't necessarily have to go on. Okay, let's go back with your beliefs. Okay, I'm saying you can be presented with evidence that is inconsistent with your beliefs, and it's an opportunity then to refine your beliefs, or you know, or I don't know. Okay, so when we say evidence, we mean this is confirmed evidence. I think there are occasions that people want to look at the veracity of evidence then, but. Okay, what about this situation? That if somebody comes to you and says, let's use the round earth, flat earth thing.
I'm still waiting for an answer.
Okay, what was your, oh, I'm sorry. True empiricism is helping.
I didn't ask you what evidence I will accept or reject.
No, we have beliefs. No, I didn't realize he wants me to repeat. He wants me to repeat his answer. When you Hogtie, when you use the word evidence, since you have rejected that evidence is not an objective determination of the state of affairs, evidence would therefore be
from your point of view, as you use the word evidence, evidence is that which would comport or cohere with what?
It may comport or it might not comport with existing beliefs. I'm sorry, just to clarify, I noticed True Empiricism helpfully typed in the side chat for me. I didn't realize the answer you're looking for. You wanted me to repeat back to you what you said before, and so I accept it.
That's not what I asked you. I didn't ask you to repeat back to me what I said. I asked you how you were wording the word, because you're not answering the question.
I'm saying, okay, evidence. Okay, I would say evidence comports. Okay, evidence or facts. When we talk about facts. Okay, I'll tell you my point of confusion. Evidence includes facts and argument.
What is a fact?
If you're talking about facts, it is that which comports with reality.
How are you able to determine reality?
Through my indirect access to reality, my indirect experience.
How?
Experience, yeah.
How are you able to determine indirectly?
Well, I do have indirect access to reality, don't I?
I didn't ask you that. How are you able to determine directly or indirectly the nature of reality?
Through sensory experience.
Is that objective?
No.
Okay, so you can't actually determine the nature of reality then, right?
I can have some, let's call it imprecise determination. There's lots of things about reality.
How would you know whether it was precise or not precise?
Well, I guess I can't. This is a well-identified, well-understood epistemological problem.
Well, if you can't determine with what precision, why would you include that in your definition?
Because that's reality, man. I mean, did you want me to take the position?
That's a slogan and a cliche to say that's reality, man. You just said with some precision, and I said, are we able to determine with any precision? And you said, well, that's reality, man. That's not an answer.
Okay.
You later went on to say, I didn't interrupt you. Earlier you rejected the idea that okay, I'm not Hogtie. This is a different kind of room. I'm not going to put up with your crap. Okay, keep it up, and you're going to be gone.
I know. I'll be kicked. I know. Go ahead, please.
No, you're going to be kicked because you're consistently rude and interrupting.
Darwin's deity. I'll ask you a quick question, real quick. Did he actually give you a definition for what evidence is? It's been a half hour.
Well, yeah. He's been going around and around and around and around, and we still don't have a clear answer. Now, earlier he outright rejected, and we all heard it. That he absolutely rejected the notion that evidence is that what coheres with one's belief, okay? In terms of the person who is allegedly presenting the evidence. So, for example, if I say to you that this beach ball that is standing at my feet, when I am speaking as evidence, what I am saying coheres or comports with my web of beliefs. Now,
right. So I think that what Dawkins is looking for.
Give me 30 more seconds. Hogtie outright rejected. We all heard him deny and reject that evidence is that which comports or coheres with one's belief. But then he just rejected the idea that evidence is something that is objectively determinism. So since he rejects objective determination and he rejects that evidence is that which comports or coheres with one's belief, then what would that be?
Right, all he's doing is he's asking you, Hogtie, since you're disagreeing with his assessment.
You disagree with two alternatives. So, what is the third alternative other than objective determination, or that evidence is that which comports with the speaker's web of belief? What would be your third alternative, Hogtie?
Can I just defer to Ronnie for a second here? I think he has a helpful clarification. Can he speak on that?
No, I'd like an answer to my question. You've yet to answer it.
Well, okay. Can I ask you to refrain from the scorekeeping you're doing? I think anybody can enter one of these rooms and start going,
I asked you a question. I'd like an answer. I'm not doing scorekeeping here. I asked you a question, Hogtie.
In 2 seconds, you're going to say, I didn't interrupt you.
If you're not able to answer it, go ahead. I'd like an answer to my
repeat the question then. I was listening for True Empiricism.
Since you reject the notion that evidence is something that is objectively determinable, and you also previously rejected in the room that evidence is that which comports or coheres to one's web of beliefs. What is your third alternative?
Okay, well, no. What I said was Evidence, okay, the facts part of evidence, that's things that comport with reality. And the arguments part of evidence, those are things that we construct, and we'd have to, whole conversation about that.
How are you able to determine that which comports to reality?
Through sensory experience.
Is that objective?
I answered, no, it's not. I've answered all those questions before. I answer the questions quickly, to the point, sharply as I can. If I don't understand your question, I ask for clarification. So I don't, I just.
Okay, so how if you don't have if you can't objectively determine the nature of reality, and you're using it through your sense experiences, aren't the conclusions following a sense experience essentially theory laden? Have you ever heard of the theory laden nature of evidence?
Okay, well, first off, when you say that I can't objectively determine the nature of reality, the thing is, I'm not the universe, right? I am a subject. Everything in my experience is subjective, right? There's nothing. It's like when people say, well, that's your subjective opinion. Well, I am the subject holding that opinion.
I'm still waiting for an answer.
No, well, no, you're not. You're interrupting. It's kind of hard to wait for an answer.
No, I'm interrupting because I've been asking for half an hour and you've been dodging and dancing.
Again, that's a complete misrepresentation. That is a complete.
No, you have been dodging hog ties. A simple question.
Every time he's asked a question, I have that quickly come back with an answer, unless I literally don't understand the question.
You haven't been answering questions.
Oh, come on, guys.
Come on. Out if he's not going to answer a simple question.
You haven't been.
It's the definition.
Okay. Repeat the single specific question you're asking.
Since you have rejected that evidence is something that is objectively determinable about the nature of reality, and you also have rejected that evidence from the speaker's point of view is that which coheres and comports to one's web of belief, what is the third alternative?
Those things are so completely unrelated. Evidence is that which comports with reality. I'm going to keep my answer that short. Evidence is that which comports with reality.
How are you able to determine the nature of reality?
Sensory experience.
And do you understand that all conclusions follow a sensory experience are theory laden? It's called the theory ladenness of observation.
Yes.
So theory ladenness would be the equivalent of a web of beliefs. You can't escape, they're synonymous. The theory ladenness of observation, if you study the philosophy of science, that all observations are essentially theory laden. In other words, those observations are not neutral objective determinations. They are the product of our web of belief following a sensory experience. So either you accept or reject that observations are the product of theory ladenness and a web of beliefs, but you already rejected that. So how are you able to produce a correct assessment from your sensory experience if it is not the product of your web of belief or theories, as in theory ladenness?
Okay, I think that time when you said it, I think the light bulb fizzled on here. Let me ask you this then. When you talk about my web of beliefs, I sort of picturing like a very big web of beliefs, like my whole worldview. So at the bottom, as we've discussed before, I'm not going to review this because this would drag us down a whole bunch. You've heard the term properly basic beliefs before. I'm not going to explain it to you because you've heard it so many times.
Thank God.
But at the bottom of it, it just speeds things up, yeah. So at the bottom, I have these very, very basal assumptions. But then above that, I have sort of more tightly held views that aren't necessarily basal. And then above all that, hovering above that, I have some sort of pointless views.
We all know this, hog tie.
Okay, I know. So I'm just setting the context for those people. I'm not re-explaining any of this at all. And I would appreciate if I could proceed to interrupt it, if that's okay. So let's say that we're evaluating a belief that I have about, whether or not it's a good idea to put fluoride in the water. If you bring me evidence one way or another, so some people have a theory, it's good to put fluoride in the water. Other people say it's harmful to put fluoride in the water. And let's say I'm one of the people who believes it's harmful to put fluoride in the water. I'm not saying I believe that, but let's say that's one of my beliefs. When you bring evidence to me, when you say that for it to be evidence in my worldview, are you saying that it has to be consistent with that higher level belief about the fluoridation? Or are you saying, or are you limiting it to it has to be consistent with my property basic beliefs, my foundation, my basal beliefs? Is that are you drawing that distinction?
One more time.
No, please answer that question. Please.
Since you have rejected that evidence from your point of view, it can be objectively determined, and you have gone on record here today that evidence is not that which comports to my network of beliefs. What is the third alternative?
Evidence is that which comports with reality.
How are you able to
I'm
determine
asking-
the nature
listen,
of
I'm asking
reality
you a
if it
question
is
that's gonna
not
help me-
either you can determine the nature of reality
Sensory
objectively,
experience.
or okay, but you see, sensory experience, all conclusions following
Theory
a
laden.
okay,
Yep.
are all
You're
conclusions
repeating, like you're
following
driving us in this circle.
are conclusions? Please don't
conversation.
interrupt me. Please do not interrupt me.
Tell me you're never interrupt me. Okay.
Are all conclusions following a sensory experience essentially theory laden?
Yes, they are. We just covered this. Yeah.
Okay, good. So you have now contradicted yourself. You have
No, I
said
haven't.
you have
No.
said that evidence is that which you gain through your sensory experience. I'll be right back.
That's okay. I can do both sides of the conversation while he's gone because he repeated himself so many times. Go ahead, G-Man.
Hogtie Champ doesn't know what the definition of evidence is. I don't think the guy knows. I don't think he was prepared for this conversation. So, Hogtie, next time you should bring a dictionary to this conversation, man, so that you can be able to define words when you come in here, man. Because I've been sitting here and I've been watching this before I came in here, and I came in here, and it's taken you a long time, of all people on YouTube, man, to define.
Well, the guy interrupts so much, and then he spins his wheels. He goes around the same thing over and over again. G-Man, what in your view, you wanted to say something about evidence?
No, I wasn't going to say nothing about evidence. I was going to disprove that some of these arguments of atheism. But you were talking about deity, and Darwin's deity was asking you a legitimate question. And I'm dying to hear this definition of evidence so I can use it.
Well, let's try this.
Okay, well, Hogtie contradicted himself.
Let me ask you this question. I want to ask G-Man one question. G-Man, can you tell me the question that you refer to as a legitimate question? Can you tell me the question that
what's the definition of evidence?
And I said, it's that which comports with reality.
Okay, and I asked you how did you determine the nature of reality? You said through your sense perceptions. Yeah. And then I asked you, are all conclusions following a sensory experience essentially theory laden? You said
we were all here for this, yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay, good. You have now contradicted yourself by affirming that, because when you say evidence is that which is the product of your sensory experience, which is essentially theory laden, that is exactly the same thing as saying that which comports to my web of beliefs. It's the same thing, Hogtie.
Okay, well that's why I asked for okay.
So you contradicted yourself.
Well, I didn't, but because
yes, you did. Did you deny earlier? Did you deny earlier that evidence is not that which comports with my web of beliefs?
Well, that's why I'm asking now. A moment ago, you heard me go.
I asked you a question. Did you say that earlier?
Okay, I'm answering.
Did you say that earlier?
Okay, can you just?
I asked you a question. Yeah. Did you say that earlier?
Okay, when you talk about the web of beliefs, are you talking about basal
assumptions? I asked you a question. Did you say originally in the room that evidence is not that which comports with your web of belief? Did you say that?
That is not what I said. I said.
Yes, you did say that.
No. You're
yes,
misplacing
you
the
did.
not.
We all heard it.
Call them misplaced negator.
I specifically asked you, is evidence that which comports with one's web of belief?
And you said no.
No.
Right. I
Good.
said no.
You have now contradicted yourself when you said that evidence is that which is derived from your sense experience, and you said those conclusions following a sense experience are essentially theory ladenness. The theory ladenness is regarding one's web of beliefs. You have contradicted yourself.
No, I have not. You asked me the question about whether or not this is what comports with this web of belief, and I said no, I don't agree with that. A moment ago, you asked me if I said that is evidence that which does not comport with your web of beliefs. That's a different statement. Okay, so
no, I have a very clear recollection of what I asked you.
A different statement.
Everyone in the room heard me ask you, is evidence from your point of view? Everyone in the room heard me ask you earlier on. And if you want to filibuster and pretend like you didn't say it, I mean, fine. The room is live and it's on record.
You asked me a question.
You stated, excuse
no.
me, I'd like to finish without you talking over me. I asked you originally, I said, when you say the word evidence, does that mean that which comports to my web of beliefs? And you said no. But now you said evidence is that which is derived from my sense experience. Well, what would you derive? Well, they would be conclusions. Okay. And all conclusions of sensory experience, you agreed, are theory ladenness. Theory ladenness is equivalent to and equal to a web of beliefs. It is the same thing.
Didi, if I asked you, I want you to answer this with certainty. If I said, do you believe that my truck has 6 tires? Do you believe that my truck has 6 tires? Your answer is going to be No, you don't hold that
I don't know.
Right. Okay, but if you say, no, that's not your belief, if I later come back and say, well, do you remember a half hour ago when you said that you knew that my truck does not have 6 tires? That's what you're doing. It's just, you know what, it's
Okay,
fine.
so is
Can
evidence
I-
is evidence a conclusion? Is evidence a conclusion based upon one's web of beliefs?
No, well, evidence isn't a conclusion. I wouldn't be comfortable using the word that way
Well,
at
then
all.
how could you have any evidence if you don't have a conclusion?
It's just gibberish.
Because a conclusion is what you have following a sensory experience.
How do you know the evolution is true if you don't have any evidence? Because that's going to be the question that's going to get thrown at you once you define that word.
Yeah. An observation is a conclusion that we have following sensory experience. All those conclusions following a sensory experience, and this is pretty much universally accepted within the philosophy of science, that it is all observations, meaning to include the idea of a conclusion following that sensory experience, are essentially theory laden. So that simply means that evidence is that which conforms to our web of beliefs, which is equal to theory ladenness.
Yeah. Regarding side chat, Veckel, everybody sees that Veckel's 100% right, and that's good advice. Unrelated to our current discussion here, but Veckel's right. Whatever. You know, you seem to like to spin this argument. I don't know what, you know, whatever. Literally.
What argument did I spin?
I don't know.
Well, you just said I spun an argument. What argument did I spin?
Oh my God. Okay, you go on this thing about evidence, and you say evidence is theory laden. I asked you for what I think is a very important clarification, and you have.
I'll ask you a third time. What argument did you just say I spun?
The one you've been talking about here, the whole evidence thing about it.
What argument did I make?
Evidence being tied to your web of beliefs.
No, I asked you if you agreed with that or not. I did make an argument.
This is and I said I don't agree with that. But then I asked for an important clarification. When you say about this web of beliefs that is consistent with your web of beliefs, do you actually at this point I don't even need you to answer this. So let me answer it this way then. If I'm looking at something that I would consider evidence, then yes, it's something that has to fit in with my basal assumptions, my understanding of the foundations of reality.
It's a product of those web of beliefs.
Yeah, yes. If that was your point earlier, then of that web of beliefs, that is the lower level, the basal assumptions. If that's what you meant, then I apologize for misunderstanding it sooner. I wish that you would apologize for not being clear about it. If this is the case.
Okay, don't give me this crap. Don't give me this bull crap. Don't give me this bull crap. Now you had your turn to talk.
I don't interrupt you.
I'm talking now.
I don't interrupt you.
Okay. Your mic is now muted. You're talking for several minutes now. Don't give me this bull crap.
I didn't talk for 10 seconds. I didn't talk for 10 seconds.
I asked you 3 times what argument did I make. Now this is the 4th time you said that I was spinning an argument. What
argument? I told you exactly what the argument was.
Argument? What? You know what?
I did.
Stop interrupting me. Now, this is the 4th time I've asked you. You asserted that I was spinning an argument in here. What argument? What premises following by a conclusion did I spin?
I have one quick question for Antonio. I'm going to ask Antonio.
You know what? I asked you the question.
This is important for
okay. No. I asked you 4 times. You accused me of spinning an argument in here. I've asked you 4 times. Okay? I'd like an answer to my question. What argument did I spin in here? Okay?
Well, after you address that, you can ask me the question you want.
I need to do it first, because what I'm going to ask you, Antonio, is about the Skype message I sent you. And that was, you recall that I said I was taking a break from work and that I had to leave at 3 o'clock my time to go get my kids. So I'm going to be out of here in 2 minutes. And after I leave, there will be all the discussion about how I ran away because I couldn't handle these questions. Okay. Okay. I don't know, Darwin.
I don't think you, for the record, I don't think you run away from any discussion.
I'll
prove it when he leaves.
See?
I'm still waiting, Hogtie. I'm still waiting. What argument did I spin?
I will have to disagree with y'all on that. I don't think Hogtie runs away from the discussion.
Disagree with me. I'll prove it when I get a chance. I get 2 minutes to talk. I'll prove it.
Yeah.
Okay,
Well,
fair enough. I just never had that experience.
no,
man.
just so
That's
people,
just-
just because
I have evidence for that, by the way.
when they're in that age group, you cannot be late from picking them up from school, or the school phones, and if you're not there in 10 minutes, they literally call the police. So when I say I have to go, I do have to go. I do welcome and invite you guys to say that that I'm a coward and I left and whatever else. Okay, Darwin's, regarding the argument, I refer very offhandedly to this thing you're talking about how evidence is tied to your web of beliefs. I did ask several clarifying questions partway through to say, well, what do you mean? And there were a couple of places where you were able to give some clarification. I actually think I understand it better this time, having heard it, than previous times I've had you say it in other Hangouts.
What
I've
argument
asked
did
you-
I
I've
make,
asked you
Hogtie?
the argument. I don't know where you're going with this argument. What you know?
You said I spun
it-
an argument. What argument did I make, Hogtie?
Well, I'm referring to this whole thing you're doing about evidence, everything that's been going on for the last half an hour.
No, I simply
We were
asked
having-
you to define what evidence is.
Yeah, and I did. And then you would say, I mean, we went through this loop over and over again. I'd say, well, what evidence is? I gave a longer definition initially, and then I shortened it to look.
Okay,
It's just,
good.
it's just
That's
facts
not
and
an
argument.
argument. I'm questioning about your view of evidence. So
Oh,
what
okay.
argument?
Okay.
Argument did I spin?
Okay, will you calm down if I retract the use of the word argument and put in a better word for it? I
Well,
don't know, whatever it is.
I'm accustomed to you making incorrect accusations.
It's not. No. It's. I use the word argument to be like, because you're arguing. I don't mean argument in the sense of a formal. I see. A moment ago, you asked me for the premises and conclusion. Now I realize you mean you. I don't use, in that sense. I didn't use the word argument to mean like a formal argument structured in the form of premises and conclusions. What I mean by argument is this bickering, argumentative style that you're doing, that instead of actually polling me honestly about my worldview or telling me things that I ought to know about your worldview,
now comes the ad hominems.
You're in this. The whole thing was ad hom, man. You
Okay.
like
Everyone, break out the Kleenex. Hogtie is now
whatever.
in crying
Now,
mode.
I'm in crying mode. Oh, look, he's crying. Oh, he's whining.
Mhm.
Anyway, we had
Somebody else in this conversation. Hogtie doesn't want to answer the questions.
He can't. He can't
me-
because he contradicted himself, and I demonstrated it.
Right.
Antonio,
Yeah,
may I on exit, Antonio, because you guys are going to have all the time to talk about this as soon as I'm gone, and I know you will.
Be on my YouTube
Antonio,
channel, Hogtie.
Oh,
Can I have?
Hey, hold on. Stop. Let him make whatever statement he want to make before he has to take off.
Yeah, I have sorry, Dawkins appears to have sprung a leak. I'm going to mute you, not to be rude, Dawkins, but only because there's a weird hissing noise. Anyway, look, it's very easy to come into these conversations and ask questions and give answers and stuff, and then make these sort of declarative statements. Oh, that person's dodging. Oh, that person's avoiding questions. Oh, that person contradicted himself. Oh, that person shot himself in the foot. And it's very easy to make those kind of statements. And I think sometimes when we say them, they're actually true because you can point out a specific contradiction. But I can tell you, I like to come in. I do like to argue and bicker sometimes. We all do. But I also like to come in and have some pleasant conversation. These guys accuse me of lying about that. But I'm going to say, as soon as I leave, they're going to go ahead and say, oh, he contradicted himself. Oh, he dodged. Oh, he refused to answer. Even though anyone who listens to this knows, you can go listen to it. Every time Darwin's asked me a question, if I had half an inkling what he was asking, I answered like that. And then later on,
this just demonstrates how delusional Hogtie is. I made myself.
No, again, you'll have all the time in the world. You have all the time in the world. Thanks for the room, Antonio. I whatever. I'll be listening offline. It'll be interesting to hear what you guys are going to say.
Yeah.
I mean, I would disagree with certain people in here that you've ran away. In my experience, talking to you, you don't run away from conversations. So
No, what he does is he filibusters and he lies.
I wouldn't know.
He lied in here. He lied in here.
What he did was
he said he didn't. He said he lied. He lied when he said I was asking unclear questions. I bent over backwards to be clear, circumspect, and succinct in my question.
He lied?
I mean, isn't it possible that he just?
I don't think it's fair to say he lied. I mean,
it's possible that he. Isn't it possible that he just misunderstood? I wouldn't just say, man, just lie.
No, not unless this is another Hogtie.
Yeah, Antonio.
Well, I gotta say,
yeah, Antonio, I'm gonna tell you why that's wrong, okay? The atheist community are constantly saying that there's no evidence for God. We're assuming that they know what the word means and that they can go deep into it, but they keep saying that there's no evidence for God. So, of course, when we ask him what the definition is, or when Darwin asks him what the definition is, we want to make sure that he has a tight grip on what the word means. for the better part of 45
Right.
minutes, the guy couldn't deal with answering the definition. On top of that, I don't know if you guys paid attention to this in the beginning when Darwin started dealing with him. Have you guys noticed that he was just like a and he wasn't answering no questions? I think somebody was feeding him answers when he was going on Google to get his answers. He became more clear.
Well, that
10 minutes of blah, 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 not even making any sense of anything and whatnot. And the other
Well,
thing
he-
that I want to clear is that you guys got to remember something about all-time champs. You know, in the Magic Temple show, like Arm Raw and DPR, and those are the so-called intellectuals of the atheist community and whatnot. Okay, so
There's a spray in the background.
fine what the word evidence means. I'm not one to lie. Fine. There's no evidence for God.
Well, I would just want to say really quick. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, man.
I'm getting like a bad echo from somebody. Yeah, so I just want to say really quick that I am kind of leaning in favor with what Dawkins was saying, just because I hear that same type of allegation being thrown at a lot of Christians here online. Where that, well, we're not being understood, we're not, making our points clear. It always comes down to some sort of semantical issue where the atheist is just completely dodging and avoiding to answer questions, and that's clearly what Hogtie was doing right now. I mean, Dawkins was speaking with him for a good 45 minutes or so, and he was refusing to answer the question and contradicting himself all over the place. And Dawkins was being very, very clear. I mean, I'm going to take this discussion and possibly air it on my other channel, and people can see it for themselves. Just play it back, and you'll see that Dawkins was being very, very careful to make it understood what he was trying to get at. And he every single time Hogtie tried to get off topic and tried to make excuses for himself, Dawkins would repeat himself and he would keep on playing games. So I just think it's being silly. What we saw here was typically what we always see. What myself, G-Man, Veckel, just a lot of games being played, acting like they didn't understand what was being said so that they could, somehow try to, get out of the problems that were facing them.
And just to add something to what you said, True, to add to what you were saying, True, what's phenomenal about that, these are the same people telling us that we don't have an education. Now, here's the thing. You're an educated person coming into a room with uneducated people. They're asking you a question, and you don't know how to, and I'm saying not you, but he doesn't know how to answer the question. It's just phenomenal how this stuff comes back to bite them in the butt later.
And you know what I love about it, actually? You know what I love about it, actually,
comment.
too, is... Yeah, go ahead, Dawkins.
Just a quick comment, okay? Now, he was the one who was overall being rude and obnoxious. He attacked me personally a number of times, which is what he commonly does. But he can't stand it when he gets a little taste of his own medicine. I asked him point blank clearly, is evidence that which coheres or comports with one's web of belief? He said, no. Okay, then later on, he said, evidence is that which comports with reality. I said, how are you able to determine what reality is? He says, through my sense experience. So evidence is that those conclusions that we derive from our sense experience. Conclusions derived from sense experience are essentially theory-laden. It's called the theory-ladenness of observation in the philosophy of science. Okay, so conclusions following a sensory experience are essentially theory-laden. In other words, conclusions following a sensory experience are a product of our web of beliefs. So at the end of the conversation, he affirmed what he denied in the beginning of the conversation. He contradicted himself, but he's not going to admit that he contradicted himself. He did. You cannot affirm that evidence is that which conforms to the conclusions from your sense experience and then agree that those conclusions are essentially theory-laden and then turn around and say evidence is not that which conforms to my web of beliefs. Those are contradictory positions, and he espoused both of them.
And look, I want to say this really quick, too, before anybody else speaks, that some people are getting on Dawkins' case for being interruptive and forcing people down, like he just did with Hogtie. But unfortunately, I got to say that that's the only way that you can deal with certain people in these discussions. A lot of times these people try to slide out of, certain points. They try to play stupid. They just make a mess out of Hangouts. And really the only way that you can deal with them is if you force them into a corner. And let people understand, look, no, this is what he said. Now he's trying to get out of this particular point. He just contradicted himself, and here's the reason why. You see, if you allow somebody to just continue running at the mouth over and over and over again, and, every time he's being, confronted with, making a contradiction or making an error or making some sort of inconsistent remark, he's going to always be backpedaling, and there's never going to be any sort of consistency in a discussion. So don't get on to, Dawkins' case for trying to pin Hogtie down. That's needed. I think the reason why a lot of these evolutionists or atheists, they get mad at Dawkins when he has to pin somebody down, or myself, because I know that I do the same thing sometimes, is because they want that room open for Hogtie or some of the other atheists so that they can weasel out of their refutations. They don't want them to be confronted live or in open rooms for making the mistakes that they're making. So just for all the Christians who are going to be watching this, I think that if you enter into some of these discussions and you see how people start to backpedal, I think that you're going to start to understand why we have to be forceful with these people and confront the fact abruptly and quickly that, wait a minute, this is actually what you said. Don't try to change what you said later on, because the point being is that if you change what you said, you're pretty much acknowledging that you were just refuted on that point.
I think that's a good point too. But the thing that I'm gonna take away from this Google Hangout is going to be the fact that this is Hogtie, champ of all people, and the fact that he was pressed on what evidence was and what reality was. You know what I mean? And he couldn't give a clear answer. It just goes to show that these people have a habit of using word. It's either he knows the definition of these words and where DD was going with the conversation, and he wanted to avoid it, or he simply doesn't know what these words are. And I think it might be a laugh. He knew he was in trouble.
Right, and you know what? It would have been more honest for Hogtie to just say, you know what, I don't know. Instead, he kept the issue going, and he should have just said, you know what, I don't know, because that would have been a more respectful response that would have been given by Hogtie. Hogtie is not a stupid guy, but I think that one. No, he's not a stupid guy. He's not a dumb guy. I think that he's smart. I think that he's got some points to make on certain topics, but clearly this was not one of them.
Yeah, that's why I made my statement and say, you know what, I don't think he's prepared for this conversation. And just say what I said with that. But it's bad though. It makes you look really bad in this community if you don't know what evidence is. You don't know where it comes from, and then try to claim that there's no evidence for God.
Well, you'll notice the bulk of his responses to me was nothing less than filibustering.
Yeah, it was that ad homs, a bunch of things. I think when they talk to you, DD, they presuppose that you're going to be a jerk, and they talk to you that way before you ever get an opportunity to be that. I guess with them hurting themselves, by the way, by doing that, because people are watching these things.
Yeah, they can dish out snide comments in spades by the dozen. But if I give them a little taste of their own medicine, they have massive hemorrhoidal attacks.
I wanted to ask him a question about atheism. Hey, DD, let me ask you a question about this, okay? Atheists claim that there's no such thing as gods or gods, right? If I go to an atheist and I say, well, if you reject the Christian God, does that make you an atheist? Is that a good question?
Well, you can ask that, but that's not atheism. Disbelieving in some gods is not atheism.
My point exactly. Nothing else needs to be said. Because that's what it is. They disagree in some gods, and that would be the Abrahamic one.
Well, that's not atheism.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just busy. I'm working. Atheism is the denial of the existence of God.
Exactly.
People who say it's a lack of belief, that's simply a dodge.
Yeah, and it's also used to try to get away from the positive claim part, because they know that whoever makes a claim has got to back it up, and they don't got no backup for that.
But how do you reject theistic claims like the theist presents you with evidence and arguments? How do you reject such things without having a positive position to stand on? If you merely just lack belief, then you have no basis to reject anything. You can't reject anything because you can't argue from anything or from anywhere. So when they attempt to, give reasons for why the evidence is insufficient, then they're negating their whole lack of belief nonsense. It's just crazy.
That's why it's always tougher talking to another theist than it is an atheist, because the atheist, in my opinion, has to lie to protect their worldview. If you talk to another theist and they give you reasons why they don't believe that the God of the Bible don't exist, they go to the Bible, they'll talk about history, they'll bring up things like that and whatnot, and then they'll talk about how great their religion is and whatnot. You talk to an atheist, they just make stuff up. Or they'll just repeat what they heard their professor say, or some popular atheist.
Oh no, I don't think that's necessarily true. I think there's some atheists who are like really genuine, and they really, I guess, they believe they know what they're talking about. But I don't know. I just don't think they necessarily do. I don't think they're all just looking to just lie though. They truly do believe what they're saying.
Wayne, let me ask you a question. What is just in one sentence? What is your worldview?
I'm a Christian.
Okay, Romans 1 says they know God exists, but they suppress the truth and righteousness. How can one suppress the truth and unrighteousness and simultaneously be sincere?
Well, it's more of a subconscious thing, right? Like people. I would
God,
say people.
Romans 1 says they're not sincere. They're in a state of rebellion.
Well, in a sense, it's like self-deception. They deceive themselves and into thinking, I don't really hate God or etc. It's deception.
I think when you say sincere, what you mean is they're cordial.
I guess so. Yeah, I mean, but yeah, like I'm saying, they can be nice, right? Like we can have good conversation with atheists and stuff like that, right? But I mean, I don't think necessarily like an atheist would walk up to Jesus and hug him if he found out Jesus existed. I think they would, they would hate him.
Okay, there are no sincere atheists. They don't exist.
Right. I mean, it seems to me that if they were truly sincere, according to what Scripture says, if they were sincere, then if they started out as atheists, then they wouldn't remain atheists for very long. There's some background noise going on.
Sorry about that.
It's all good. But I gotta go with what Scripture says. I mean, they may sound sincere to me when I'm talking to them, but I mean, what does the Bible say at the end of the day? If the Bible says that they're suppressing the truth and the unrighteousness, then I gotta go with what that says, not with what I feel they're portraying to me, because my feelings don't dictate the truth. The Word of God is the truth, and that's just the bottom line. Did you have anything to say on this, Veckel? You've been quiet for a little bit. Or can anybody even hear me at all? Because this room is like dead silent right now.
And I can hear you.
Okay, cool. I think everybody's gone. Like people said, be right back, be right back. Yeah, I think everybody's gone for right now. But
I'll be right back. But I really honestly,
I'm here. I'm just working.
Oh.
Okay, go ahead, Brother Wayne.
Well, no, it's just that, like I said yesterday, I think it's just very strange for somebody to be an atheist. Or I think it's weird to just straight out say, like no God exists, or I mean, I guess you could be agnostic, right? You could say, I don't know which God, because and the only way I guess you could honestly be agnostic is if you don't necessarily go out and search, find out that Christianity or whatever might be true, right? And so you use your agnosticism as an excuse because you still want to live how you want to live, do what you want to do, or whatever like that. And that's kind of what I noticed, right? Like some people are agnostic towards I don't know, Jesus's existence, and then you ask him, have you Christopher Hitchens, as a matter of fact, he was saying he was an atheist, right? And And I think it was William Lane Craig. He said, "Well, have you ever looked into the resurrection of Jesus?" And Christopher Hitchens said something that I really think about a lot. But here you have this man, right, going around speaking and doing all these events and writing all these books about God and God not existing. But he didn't look at one of the most important claims in history about Jesus's resurrection. So I think, like I said, it's
Yeah, it's really sad too because I believe he died an atheist. He was an atheist to death, man. He was bent on his atheism.
yes,
He
it's
was
sad.
defiant atheist to the death, man. It was pretty sad. And he had to go out that way.
I just don't see why somebody would just in Christopher Hitchens in his case, like, I can definitely say like he hated God. He was a God hater. I don't care what anybody says. That man, he had a sincere, venomous hatred towards God. And I just don't see how you could hate
Oh
God.
yeah,
It's
no question about it.
strange, very strange to me.
This is why I don't buy a lot of these atheist claims when they just say, well, it's not that I hate God, or it's not that, or they'll say something like, you as a Christian asked me why I'm interested in the God question. And that was simply because, well, uh, it directly influences my life and this and that. And I don't really think it has anything to do with any of that because the bottom line is secularism is on a level where it's increasing more than it has ever before. And they have a very strong influence in this society today, despite the fact that the overwhelming majority of people identify as being theists. They do have a significant influence in this society today. So I can't sit up there and just say that it's just, believers or Christians dominating society and influencing politics and things like that. They do have a significant, if not a dominant influence in politics and society today. So they can't be like, well, it's because Christians are trying to shove religion down people's throats and trying to get their beliefs in politics. Well, garbage, because it doesn't matter whether you claim to be religious or not. If you have a certain amount of influence, you can get what you believe into politics. I mean, you got people who are trying to get in God we trust off our money now. So, I mean, this sit up there and say it's just, this is just something that believers, the Christians, are guilty of. It's just a bunch of garbage. I wouldn't even say that Christians are trying to do any such thing, but I think there's clear evidence that you got a lot of atheists that want to get things like in God we trust off our money. And there's clear evidence when you look at things like that, which does suggest that they want to get their views represented in the public square. And they try every year to basically get Merry Christmas, out the main title and just try to change the Happy Holidays because it might offend people who aren't believers and all this other stuff. They do often try to get their views represented in politics and in society in general. So when they say, "Oh, it's just Christians just try to shove their views down people's throats in politics and stuff," I'm not saying that no Christians do that, but to say that they don't attempt it on some level is just intellectually dishonest.
Well, no, they do. The guy Dan Barker, he's still living. He's still going around trying to get Christmas dismantled and stuff like that, and suing people for having Jesus pictures and stuff out during Christmas. But I don't know, like, and it just it's a very weird thing, right? For you to just like if I don't believe in, like, I don't know, like Zeus or like Muhammad or something like that, right? And like I have all these Muslim neighbors, and they're all worshiping their God, or all these Jewish neighbors, and they're worshiping, just Yahweh alone, not Jesus. I don't know. I wouldn't really feel like I needed to infringe on their, I guess, religious freedom, right? Like, I mean, they can worship their God the way they want to, and I can worship my God the way I want to, and like we'll just part ways. And I don't think every atheist is like that, right? Like there may be, people who disbelieve in God, but I don't think they're all like trying to infringe on religious rights and stuff like that. But the ones who are,
I
I
agree.
think
I think there are ones out there who are very smart and are very respectful of other people's religious liberties. I would definitely agree with that. I think there's a growing number of those people who are very antagonistic towards Christianity. I think, and it would make sense because biblical prophecy says that it's going to get to a time to where Christians are going to be very, very persecuted. And I wouldn't say that we're in like a persecution culture right now, but we are getting to a culture which is more and more anti-Christianity, anti-Christian in nature. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think we're pretty much in that culture now, right? I mean, you go to a college campus now, you say you're a Christian. I mean, oh my gosh, you will get just a crap storm. But I don't necessarily think that's like I don't think that's necessarily to do with atheism. I think that verse might just be talking about like Islam. I think Islam might be one of the end time religions, in my own opinion.
I would love to go back to college just for that one reason alone. I'll go back to college and admit I'm a Christian so fast, and they'll respect me after I say it. I promise. I'll embarrass them and their professor.
Well, I'm sure if you tune into the other hangouts tonight or tomorrow, you're going to be hearing Hogtie moan and whine and cry and bellyache about how he was tortured and being abused and interrogated.
It's still early.
Yeah.
Not Tuesday yet, so yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You'll notice there's a common thread in the way he responds. He filibusters, he flip-flops, okay? And he really doesn't say much about anything.
I know with me personally, I've stopped talking with Hogtie through the chat a long time ago because he likes to respond to me with these incredibly elongated sermonettes in the comment section. And I just like, listen, man, I got a wife and I got a life. I don't have time or the patience to read this entire book that you responded to me in and then respond to every single point. I don't have the time for that, and I don't have the obligation. So I don't talk to him through the chats anymore. That guy's a preacher, I tell you that. Not a biblical one, obviously, but yeah.
No, he's not even. I think he has an overly inflated opinion of his own intellect and his communication ability. He really doesn't say very much.
So I came in towards the. I came in a little bit late. What did you cover? All of your top 10 or top 5 dumbest arguments of atheism, or are you still going?
No, we never got a chance because we couldn't get a straight answer out of Hogtie.
Well, I covered them all before
Okay.
most everybody in here came. The only one that was here when I was talking about them was true empiricism, but I can go over some of the points briefly. I won't give the full explanations. I'll just kind of briefly outline the top 5.
Right.
Let's see.
Yeah, I'm curious to hear it. Yeah.
Yeah, number 5 was there hasn't been any evidence or sufficient evidence presented for God.
Mm-hmm.
And I outlined 3 reasons for why that's ridiculous. Because number 1, they ignored defining what constitutes evidence or sufficient evidence. Number 2, they failed to address evidence actually presented, and they merely dismiss it as evidence, as no evidence or insufficient evidence. And number 3, they have fallacious criteria in which they would consider evidence or sufficient evidence if they do try to give a criteria for evidence at all. Number 4 is the burden of proof lies upon the one making the positive claim, which they say is the theist, not the other way around. But we both know that's not true. Everybody has their equal share in the burden of proof, and atheists make claims like anyone else.
Atheism and theism are both positive claims.
Yep,
Number
they sure are.
3, the number 3 was using the Bible as evidence for God is circular reasoning, which is ridiculous because
no. If God gives infallible revelation, our justification is circular.
Well,
okay.
Well, here's one.
But it's a positive circular.
From an evidentiary point of view.
Here's the reason why it's not a problem. Is because any final authority that actually has the capacity to determine the nature of reality would be, by virtue of definition, circular. Well, how do we know? Because I'm the final authority. There can't be another independent authority to confirm the final authority. So it is circular, but it is not a vicious circularity.
Right. I wasn't approaching it from a presuppositional point of view, but I see your point, though.
Yeah.
The point I was approaching it from this angle, and this is why I said I don't buy their claim as circular reasoning because such a claim is based on ignorance of what the Bible is. First of all, the term Bible means library. What is the significance behind this? The Bible is a collection of 66 books compiled into one huge book. It is literally a library. And second, the writings in the Bible, which make up the 66 books, are a collection of historical documents. Using different historical documents to corroborate each other cannot, by definition, be circular reasoning by any stretch of the imagination. Also, using historical documents which speak about God can rationally be used to support he exists. These documents have real, historically verified persons, such as Abraham, Moses, Noah, and even Jesus himself.
Well, you're correct on that, Antonio, but let me just interject. When we're talking about the nature of the Bible, that it is the Word of God, it is circular because God has inspired, has said so.
Well, yeah, in that sense, yeah, absolutely, I would agree. I wasn't coming at it.
But if you're just simply saying is if we're approaching the Bible as a historical first, then it's not circular. We're pointing to it as a primary piece of historical testimony.
Yes, and that's what I'm trying to say exactly.
Right.
So yeah, that was the number 3 point when they try to say, well, circular reason. Well, no, it isn't, because I mean that would be like saying that using a historical document to give evidence for a certain event is circular reasoning, and the Bible was constructed of historical documents because they're just ignorant of what is contained in what is the Bible. They think it's just a bunch of stories. No, these are historical documents that record historical events. The number 2 reason I said is believing in God is just blind faith, no reason, and a denial of reality, which we all know that is ridiculous because biblically speaking, faith is what we have good reason to
in order to say believing in God is blind faith, then they're going to have to successfully argue that the Christian God does not exist.
Yeah, exactly. And I was just saying that it's not blind faith. We have good reason to trust.
That's called prejudicial speculation, or prejudicial conjecture. How are you able to determine that our faith in God is not an outgrowth and something that is facilitated by God's revelation? How would you know that, Mr. Atheist? Well, I don't accept that. I say, okay, well, you don't accept that, but is it possible that that's the case? What are they going to say? No. So they have to say yes. If it's possible that it's the case, then if it's possible, then how can you say universally or globally that our faith is just simply blind faith?
Exactly.
You see, they're hoisted by their own petard. When they make global or universal statements, they're going to have to support it. And if something is possibly the case, then that mitigates against certain global or universal statements that they make.
Yeah. And I was just saying that we have good reason to trust in God and Jesus Christ not only because he said so, but because he proved it and revealed it to us in scripture. Because even if you look at non-believers, for example, who form a bond with somebody that they trust, they get to that bond and that level of trust for a good reason. And they put that faith in that person if they've been there for them through thick and thin. They have sort of a faith in that person, but it's based on trust, not just blind just following. And I just said infinitely more so that is true with Jesus for what he has already done and continues to do for us. We have good reason to trust him. So and I just said that you may have theists out there also who may be uninformed and approach it from a blind faith type perspective, but that cuts both ways. Even for the atheists can simply hold to their lack of belief blindly in spite of reason and deny reality. And without them giving sound arguments for their rejection of theistic claims, all they are doing is engaging in blind faith. And then I gave a couple of honorable mentions, but I called them dishonorable mentions too, because there's nothing honorable about a bad atheist argument. Like the honorable mention I gave, one of them was, who designed the designer? Really bad. You don't need an explanation for an explanation to be true. And if God is the greatest conceivable being, there couldn't be anything greater than him anyway, so that's just dumb. And the other honorable mention I gave is alleged Bible contradictions, which there have been no provable Bible contradictions found anywhere. What has been found is like mistakes in translations and textual errors, but not any outright contradictions of the word of God. But what they do is outright misread passages. They don't use exegesis. They don't cross-reference. They don't study the background culture of the writings and all sorts of messed up things that they do in order to misread the text. And then I said the number one most terrible atheist argument, in my opinion, is what we were talking about with Hogtie today, is extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And we see where that led in the discussion today.
Hogtie is just a windbag, big bag of gas of hot air.
Okay, so yeah, it seems like a couple of people had to leave, but I know y'all had y'all little conflicts here and there, but I mean, I wouldn't say that he was a liar or anything like that, but I I will agree that I do think he took a long time trying to get to certain questions. I will say that much, and I'll have to listen to the tape again to see if he outright
listen to again.
Himself.
Okay, it's called filibuster. No, he did contradict himself. He said that evidence is not that which conforms to one's web of beliefs. But later on, he said evidence is that which conforms to reality. And I said, how are you able to determine the nature of reality? And he said through his sense perceptions. Well, you just don't merely have sense perceptions. When you have sense perceptions, you have mental conclusions following those sense perceptions. Since observation is inherently theory-laden, this is widely recognized, it's uncontroversial within the philosophy of science, and then he essentially agreed that he determines the nature of reality by sensory experience, which is followed by a conclusion from the product of your web of beliefs. But if evidence is just sense experience followed by your web of beliefs conclusions, that is synonymous
from saying that evidence is that which conforms to your web of beliefs.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. All right. There's very little difference in those two explanations. But you see, he was caught in a contradiction, and he didn't want to admit that he contradicted himself.
Yeah, this was a good hangout, but I'm about to end now. I wish you would have gotten here earlier, multiple man, but I got to end though.
No. Listen, this is great. It's always good to speak to you. Always good to see you too, Didi. I don't know if Didi heard me. Did you hear me?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm just busy listening, talking, and working. How are you doing? I haven't seen you in a while.
Yeah, no, I've been a little busy, so it's funny. I always like talking to you guys because you guys always bring up good points. So, but listen, I totally understand, Antonio. If you got to go, you guys have a good night. God bless, and hopefully I'll be speaking to you guys soon. All right?
Yeah, sounds good, man. Thanks for coming by, and as always, it's always a pleasure having you in the room, Dee. I know the atheist community in general seems to really hate your guts, but
I wear it as a badge of honor.
yeah, they got to address the arguments when you get through.
Yeah.
That's just the bottom line. They don't have to like it, but
and you'll see, Hogtie will try to walk all over you. But you see, I gave him lots of rope. I did not abuse my mod powers, but I wasn't going to allow him to abuse me. Okay.
Yeah. Well,
all right. Listen, I gotta run too. Thank you for inviting me, and we had a good opportunity to show the fallacious reasoning of a skeptic. Thank you, Hogtie.
Yeah, it's always a great conversation when you two are in the room. But yeah, thanks for coming by, man. I really appreciate it. And to everyone out there watching, thanks for watching. Take care. God bless and peace.
Okay.